did some work there, back here. And then I'll be driving back as soon as I leave. Good to see you. Yeah, there you go.
All right, is everybody ready? All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. I realize that there are going to be some people that are going to be late because of the traffic out there, but we'll get started here and see where we can go. Emily, you're going to give me a high sign back there? Okay. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have established a quorum. Nice to have Vice President Farmer with us. He has other commitments that he had today, but he made time for us, which is wonderful. Thank you. We have a report from closed session, Mr. Carmel.
We do, President Pearson. The board discussed winding up the general manager recruitment and the terms and conditions of the new general manager's contract, and continued to discuss the performance of the interim general manager, who I think at this point now holds the record for the most consecutive performance evaluations in the history of any manager in San Luis Obispo County. Thanks.
Thank you. Agenda review, any additions or deletions, or anybody want to move anything in particular? No? Okay. I would like to recognize Director Rice for a moment. Thank you.
Just a really quick statement. As some of you already probably know, my husband passed away at the beginning of this month. He was in Fresno to visit with his mother and had experienced heart failure. There's going to be a celebration of life at a future date that hasn't been set yet, and I want to thank everybody who's already offered their sympathies. Thanks. Thank you, President.
Okay, thank you. A couple of public service announcements and things. There's a Big Sur Highway Sustainable Transportation Demand Management Plan meeting next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And Mr. Ogren, have you heard they're going to meet here?
Yeah, it's my understanding it is being scheduled here at the Vets Hall.
Okay. This is the Transportation Department and the land use people trying to get together to figure out how we can handle the increased traffic that we're getting on Highway 1, and including parking and that kind of thing. So if you have interest in all that, please attend. It's an open hearing. Thank you. Yes, Director Rice.
The Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Group meets tomorrow morning at the old Cambria Grammar School, starting at 9 a.m. and that's an all-day meeting. It's a great meeting to go to and see how they handle doing that kind of advising from a citizen's perspective. And 9 a.m. Old Cambria Grammar School. Call me if you want information. I'll be happy to give you more.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was also going to ask the general manager if he'd like to have Mr. Green give a short report on the water mishap of yesterday, since he's in the audience.
Certainly.
Got to hit the button.
Push. Okay. All right. So yesterday was just kind of a run-of-the-mill line replacement like we usually perform. When we got down to the corporate stop, which is a valve on the main, it's a 12-inch main, the actual band, or the saddle, as they're called, was cracked and broken. We struggled for hours to find valves that would isolate it None of the valves actually isolated, so we led to turning off other streets, which is why half of the west side was without water for a good portion of the afternoon. And we had the repair made, the new line installed by 7:30 last night, and the road was back in regular traffic order. So, yeah. If anybody would like to see it, I do have the saddle in my truck, and I can kind of show you the example of what happens. It's electrolysis. There are several dissimilar metals which had caused electrolysis, which is called quicker aging of this, which led to the failure. The actual compaction of the ground is what held it intact that whole time. So my concern is how many more of these are out there.
Yes.
It's a steel saddle with brass fittings, with plated galvanized bolts holding it together. So putting water, which is already charged through there, just becomes a battery and basically a sacrificial anode. So, yeah.
Right. All right. Well, we really appreciate you guys working hard and getting that done.
Certainly, yeah, thanks.
And getting the water back on as soon as possible.
It was a good training exercise, like
Yes.
these guys. So, yeah.
President Pearson, well, we have Jim up there. Maybe on a brighter note, he can give a quick update on the efforts associated with closing the impoundment basin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
We're probably about 95% of solids removal right now. We're finishing some of the finer granules are being collected. We've been hauling those to an approved land waste facility, and we're having pressure sprayer come in on Monday to give it kind of the final touch. Regulator has asked us to get the bottom of the pond as close to the sidewall color as we can, and that's what the pressure spraying is going to be involved. And so hopefully after that we can have the regulator out before the start of the month, and we can discontinue our current monitoring schedule, which is daily there. And we're trying to get a hearing scheduled with the State Water Resources Control Board. Their next one is in July. In Santa Barbara, we were unable to make the docket for that, so we'll have to wait until September to where we can actually have a true closure of our Title 27. But our physical end of it and our monitoring looks like will probably cease by the end of the month. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. That's all good news.
Then the
Yes.
final note on that is coordination with the regional board. Have also indicated that even prior to their formal hearing, their executive director may be able to relieve us of the bond requirement on his own discretion. So hopefully that will be done even quicker.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Good report.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment. Excuse
Sure.
me.
Sorry.
It's all right. I happened to drive by twice yesterday early when they said, it's a relatively minor thing, and then when everything was finally coming together at the end. So I just wanted to comment on the fact that it wasn't just people from the water department, but people from wastewater and from facilities and resources that were out there helping you as well. So it's a total team effort by our very skilled and hardworking people out there in the field. So I just wanted to comment on that, Jim. Thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize Captain Torlano. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board and community. Microphone on. Now it is. Good afternoon, board and community. It's with great pleasure I'd like to honor engineer promotion of one of our finest reserve firefighters. Lionel Salas is here with his family today. And for many of you that don't quite understand what goes into an engineer promotion, it's a huge deal. He's been working on this for probably about a year and a half. He has a full commercial Class B driver's license, has a lot of drive time, a lot of mechanical skill, and a lot of pump theory and engineer calculations, hydraulic calculations, which are not easy to do. So let's all give a hand. If Lionel would come up, we'll have his mom pin his he gets little fire engine collar brass. So it's a great honor. He worked really hard, so please congratulate him. Double can. One on each side. Don't poke him. I want to share too. He's come a long way from about a year ago. We were responding. I think my full-time engineer was on another call on the water tender, and Lionel was driving me. And he looks at me en route to a commercial structure fire, which ended up being a false alarm. But he looks at me with these big eyes and says, "Cap, I don't think I know how to pump this engine." And I said, "This is not the time to tell me that, Lionel."
Never lived in that one.
Yeah, he's come a long way. All right. Good job.
All right, thank you very much. Very special when we have some of our people get recognized, so we want to do that as much as possible. All right, we're at public comment. We'll start with Clive Metric and followed by Tony Church. Welcome.
Thank you. Yesterday's broken pipe is another reminder how we're taking the right course by raising rates to the levels necessary to replace worn and inefficient equipment. These rate increases naturally are unpopular with some people, especially those on fixed incomes, but we can't let the unpopularity with some folks stop us from raising rates to the levels necessary to provide services and make needed upgrades. I congratulate you on having the courage to support the rate increase. Not only will the rate increase help to replace old equipment, you will save money through decreased energy use and lower our carbon footprint. I also appreciate the work you are doing to obtain a permanent permit for the SWF despite the effort of a small minority of residents to derail the process. The process now is at the county level where I'm getting the impression it is languishing. I don't know if I'm right about that. Is the county afraid? I hope you can light a fire under their butts. Maybe they need some help with ideas on how to make the permanent permit more palatable to the Coastal Commission. Perhaps you could have a brainstorming session with them on what permit conditions would make the permit as uncontroversial as possible. And please, as you're doing your regular course of business, don't sweat the small stuff. You know, these little things keep coming up, like the moving the schoolhouse, and is more water going to get used? Of course, more water is not going to get used. It doesn't matter what end of the town you use to relieve yourself and wash your hands. It's the same amount of water. And I want to finish up by talking about being a builder. And I'm not talking about a builder of walls or houses. I'm talking about generic building. And back in the early 70s, I listened to a hard rock station. And every evening they made this announcement, which I think is something to remember when the going gets tough. The impression your friends and others have of you is based on what you do, to teach, to create, to accomplish, or to build. Whether you dig the trench for the foundation of a building, whether you lay the last brick on its top, whether you work with a pick and shovel or the tools and machines or in the office, or sell the products and services of industry, whether you grow, prepare, or harvest the very food we eat, whether you are raising, teaching, or educating your family or others on how to become a builder, no matter what you do or who you are, if you are a builder, you are one to be long remembered. Those who attempted to destroy the pyramids of Egypt were despised and soon forgotten. Those thousands who labored to build them will never be forgotten. Be big, be a builder. And thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tony Church.
Good afternoon, President and Directors. I am here once again to focus your attention to the fire danger in our town. I was pleased to see that the Water Department has acquired a new tool and in May began to exercise valves with relation to our fire hydrants. Regrettably, there were very few details as to the extent of this operation, if any problems were encountered, and how much water was used. However, what I do wish to point out is that the maintenance of our fire hydrants seems to have stopped completely. At the end of 2017, 98 had been serviced, and an additional 136 were serviced in 2018, making a total of 234. There appears that none have been serviced in 2019, and I would like to know when we can expect the remaining hydrants to be serviced. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Dean.
Afternoon. I would like to start with a positive note this afternoon with some of my personal observations of our district. In the past few months since the departure of our previous general manager, with the positions of interim general manager being filled by first Ms. Madrid and then Pava Ogren, the current makeup of our board and directors, and the continued existence of our standing committee, I feel that there has been some real change that has happened. The lines of communication, transparency, and coordination between the district, the board, and the public has improved immensely. The public's questions are being answered much more willingly. The public's opinions and concerns are being taken much more seriously and responded to. Mr. Ogren's relaxed demeanor has had a calming effect that has provided an openness that, to me, has really allowed us to see the talents and the expertise that our staff, our facility supervisors, and all our folks out there in the field working for our community have. The access of information and interaction with the appropriate staff and plant supervisors that the standing committees needed and have requested to do their task on behalf of the board and the public have been given openly with no reservation. We are about to embark on more changes as we consider a new appointment of a general manager and the move of Mr. Ogren to utilities manager. Yes, there are still issues that are sources of contention and division in our community, but my hope is that all of this transparency, calmness, openness, and cooperation with the public will continue to help lead us on the path to regaining trust between the district and the community and help heal some of that division. And I just want to thank you, all of you for this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have no other public comment, so we'll move on to regular business.
President
yes,
Pearson,
I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if I'm sure because we're in between and have so much change going on with the GM, I was just wondering if there's any way that we had an update on the county permit and the fire hydrant servicing, or if we'd need to get back to those at the next meeting or something.
Sure. I'm betting that the fire hydrant issue will need to be addressed at the next meeting. But can you give us an update as to where we are on the coastal development permit with the county?
Certainly,
what next steps are?
The ball is in the district's court. And on Tuesday at Resource and Infrastructure, the standing committee meeting, we initiated public discussion.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We will have a report on the hydrants next time as to why we haven't gotten any this year. Thank you. All right, regular business, business number 3A, discussion of candidates for the Special District Risk Management Authority Board. Mr. Ogren, do you want to introduce this?
Certainly. President Pearson, members of the board, agenda item 3A is discussion and consideration of selection of candidates for election to the Special District's Risk Management Authority Board of Directors. The individuals who have applied for the positions are in your package, and I know that Ms. Madrid has helped with this item. Then we pretty much looking for a board decision and be glad to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Director Rice.
I spoke with former Director Merle Clift, who was also a member of the board of the SDRMA while he was a member of this board. And through his service, he no longer serves on SDRMA because he's not on the board here, but he did work with two of the people who are candidates this time, and he had recommendations that of who he would like to see based on his experience firsthand working with them, and that's Bob Swan, who's an incumbent for Groveland Community Services District, and Sandy Seifert Raffleson, who's also an incumbent. And the additional advantage is the seats that are not up this year, most of them are filled by people from Southern California in these two districts. And actually, the third one that I'm going to recommend, because he only gave me the two incumbents, those are the only two he knew. But the Bernie Water District is the third one. That's Jim Hamlin. Those three are in Northern California, so it gives a good geographic spread of people for that board. So I would recommend that we either vote for the two incumbents to be reseated or the two incumbents plus Jim Hamlin. Because I think Merle's never steered us wrong yet on giving those recommendations. He just couldn't be here himself to give them.
Yeah, great. Thank you for contacting him and getting that recommendation. That's terrific. Director Howell.
I concur with Director Rice in this, not having had Mr. Cliff's input, which confirms my own feeling. I tended to, just from reading the written material, that the two incumbents struck me as being they really do need, and I do tend to lean towards towards James Hamlin as well, again for the same reason.
Okay. I wasn't very impressed with Mr. Hamlin's little write-up. He didn't answer most of the questions very well, so I kind of backed off him and went with Mr. Claypool, but I'm easily swayed on this one. I really don't have much of opinion here.
Interestingly, it struck me the same way. I certainly felt that the incumbents were strong in their positions, and so it's good to have had the feedback from Mr. Cliff in that regard.
Can you closer to the mic?
Maybe if I... Is this better?
Yes.
Yes, okay. The two incumbents struck me as being strong in their definition of and commitment, and so I didn't have any problems with the incumbents. I leant towards Claypool also because of his resume. Frankly, I wasn't thinking in terms of the segregation between Northern and Southern. And not knowing either of the individuals, I guess I don't have, a specific leg to stand on in terms of supporting one strongly than the other, than just the fact that Mr. Claypool struck me as having a much stronger resume for the position.
Yeah. Okay. Director Howell?
Yes, and that was my initial feeling too. That the rather limited amount of writing that Mr. Hamlin provided, but I tend to be swayed by the balancing, being as we tend to be, our interests probably coincide more with the northern section of the state. So I would be more inclined, just for that reason, all other things being equal, to go with Mr. Hamlin, I think. But I don't feel real strongly either way on that.
Okay. Vice President Farmer.
Well, I just want to comment on the fact that Mr. Claypool is from Honey Lake Valley Resource Conservation District, and just right there. It just gives me such a good feeling, so why not?
Does anyone know where Honey Lake Valley Resource Conservation District is, by chance?
It's in Susanville.
Susanville.
That's what it says.
Well,
Okay.
that's
Northern
Northern California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So then it sounds like from the discussion that if I moved to vote for Bob Swan, Jesse Claypool, and Sandy Seifert Raffleson, that would be a motion acceptable.
Yes.
I would second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Rice?
Aye.
Director Stidel?
Aye.
Director Howell?
Aye.
Vice President Farmer?
Aye.
President Pearson?
Aye. Okay, carries 5-0. Thank you.
President Pearson?
Yes, sir.
Before we move forward, there's an additional requirement that the board approve the official ballot that's in the agenda packet. So we'll need a separate motion.
A separate motion to approve.
I
The ballot.
move that we approve the ballot.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on that one. And
Director Rice?
Aye.
Director Stidel?
Aye.
Director Howell?
Aye.
Vice President Farmer?
Aye.
President Pearson?
Aye. Carries 5-0. Okay, now on to 3B, which is a discussion and consideration of the capital improvement project plan. Gentlemen. Yes, sir.
President Pearson, members of the board. On 3B, discussion and consideration of capital improvement prioritizations and review of finance and resource and infrastructure joint special meeting outcomes. Many of these outcomes are ultimately included in your budget, which is a subsequent hearing of today's meeting. I wanted to clarify some of the attachment, because within the board letter itself provides a link to the agenda package of that joint meeting. But we also included, and wanted to make sure it was included, the prioritization list that was discussed and reviewed by the committee during the Prop 218 process in 2018. And I wanted to make sure to include it as simply rememorializing it, because as we move forward, we want to make sure to continue to track how are we doing compared to the Prop 218 estimates. So it's included for that purpose really alone, and not for any separate discussion. Certainly tracking our movement and our progress on capital projects versus original estimates. We should expect that there's always going to be changes. And that's a major work effort upcoming with the Resource and Infrastructure Committee. Overall, I think my observations of the process, both the numerous meetings of Resource and Infrastructure to go through the prioritizations, and I want to make sure to thank the staff here, especially Jim and John on water and wastewater. I also want to point out that in the board letter itself, Haley Dotson and Annette Young helped with pulling it together, but we forgot to put Melissa Bland's name on that particular item, and certainly she's always important in terms of review and this particular work effort, and I appreciate her as well in this on what we've been doing. But considering that ultimately the outcomes are included in the budget, and that's where we're going to be focusing our presentation, at this point in time, I guess I'd prefer to turn it over to the two committee chairs if they want to provide any comments in terms of the process and the outcomes of the joint meeting.
All right, very good. Director Howell, you want to lead?
It seems reasonable to start. I guess we did, in fact, commence the process of going through the list, which is included here, working with staff, several meetings, and many thanks for the extra time the staff spent with us to familiarize ourselves with the operation and with some of the deficiencies, and try to get some sense as to the priorities. So it was mainly a matter of first educating ourselves and trying to understand and taking the input from the department managers. And basically, trying to think. There was considerable work, and we had a small ad hoc committee also formed, which met separately with the department managers as well as we worked through to prioritize things. And the other thing that took a great deal of our attention, of course, is to first understand the proposal from PG&E for their sustainable turnkey project, to understand what it meant for us, and to learn what we were being offered and what was at risk for doing that. So, and once we had assembled all this in our minds, we put forth a recommendation to the Finance Committee to accept certain priorities as they were laid out on another document, which we then forwarded to them for discussion. And then I'll let Director Steidel take it from there.
And once receiving that information, then the Finance Committee was in a position to be able to take a look at the resources that were going to be available to try to execute the priorities that had been determined by research by the R&I Committee. We were able to define those kinds of things, return that information to them. We, in addition, had the joint meeting, which was extremely valuable in being able to exchange information with one another. I think that having that kind of meeting will be integral in going forward when we're going through and making these determinations of what needs to happen. in application of resources and definition of our priorities for the infrastructure needs. I was very proud, actually, of both committees in terms of the effort and the knowledge that they gained through the process in being able to make the kinds of decisions that needed to happen. There was a significant impact of being put in the position of having to evaluate the turnkey project that was brought to us during that process. At times, there were some cumbersome things that had to be overcome, both in terms of just everyone understanding what it represented and then trying to understand the implications of the options that were available to us as a result of that. So I feel very comfortable with the information that's been brought forth to the board as a whole and for the community also. And that said, I also appreciate the response and interaction by members of the community for both of those committees in the work that they were doing, because there were many times when that input was very valuable to us. So the staff also, I'm kind of rounding up here a little bit, but I wanted to say also that the staff was supremely responsive to, I know the Finance Committee, not having seen all of the R&I Committee meetings, but I would have expected it was the same kind of thing with the turn of information that we've got. And we would never have been able to get through this process and accomplish the things that we did without the commitment that we had from them and from the members of the committee. So I'm very pleased with the establishment of the committees for the community and for the board. I think it will help immensely in our decision-making and a more rapid decision-making process for us, and make the decision-making itself less reactive and more proactive.
And I must say more transparent.
And more transparent, yes.
Okay. Director Rice.
I just have a question here on I'm on page 22 in the last paragraph, right about in the middle. It says, if the committee decides to move forward with the 12 items on the IGA, it's not the committee that's deciding if we go forward, is it? It would be the board. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that we're clear on who's making what decisions, because the committees are new. I don't want to lose track of where the authority sits.
Yeah. The committee should recommend to us what they think is the right thing to do, and then the board will take action on the PG&E SSA, I guess it's called. Is it SST program?
And I do want to echo my compliments to all the folks, whether it was staff or community or the committees themselves, the members of the committees, for doing these deep dives so that the board can be not just quicker in decision making and less reactive, but better informed.
More capable.
Yeah, it makes a big difference when we know that there's some people that have also put their brains on it too. It helps me feel more confident that we're making good decisions based on good information.
Good, thank you. Director Howell?
Before I forget, yes, Director Steidel reminded me I really do need to thank the members of the public who attended our many meetings. Some are in the room now, and I want to make sure they understand that they are much appreciated. And those who didn't have time today to attend, again, it was a tremendous help. So it means that this board is no longer working in a vacuum, that we actually can get some real understandings as to, even though people may not agree, at least we can get clarity as to what some of the concerns are. Director Rice brought up an interesting issue, and perhaps I need to ask for clarification from the board on this. It's a done deal now. We're proceeding with the preliminary budget, but there was some discussion about, does the Resources and Infrastructure Committee make a recommendation to the board, which then passes it to the Finance Committee, or does it come from R&I and go to the Finance Committee and then to the board. So I think we played it both ways, but and maybe that's the way it should be. But if the board has any comment on that, I'd like to hear it. Because I know this is going to come up again.
I really don't have any preference, as long as if it's a financial thing that has to do with the budget, I guess it has to go through the Finance Committee. But if it's just something that's already been approved in the budget, but you're trying to get approval on, like prioritizing or something like that, changing something up, that would make some sense just to bring it straight to us. Anyone else?
I agree. It's in the case where it's needed by the decision makers to know both sides of the equation, I think it has to present from both sides. And so I agree with the statement that you had made.
Okay. I had two things in the staff report that I have questions on. The first one involves the Army Corps of Engineers. I don't have any problem with not using the 40K to hire a consultant to do anything, but disregarding the possible funding that we might be able to get through the Corps of Engineers to do something out at the SWF after we get the CDP just doesn't make any sense to me. There is money that is out there. It's been authorized but not appropriated. Is that the right? The other way around, right?
My understanding is that it's been both included in an authorization as well as an appropriation. So under the Water Resource Development Act, you can certainly get authorizations with no funding, and there have been projects that have sat on the federal books for years that have been authorized. And in those cases, it's really the Army Corps' engineers' discretion as to whether they'll fund those projects within the Army Corps' discretionary budget, which rarely ever happens due to the needs of the Army. But when Congress provides a specific appropriation, then that's direction from Congress, and the Army Corps follows suit. And so Cambria does have both an authorization and an appropriation, and we have been in discussions with the Army Corps of Engineers over the last couple months about future potential work. The item was only excluded from the budget because those discussions aren't at a point where they're solid enough in order to recommend appropriation of district funds. But the discussions are continuing, and we are hopeful for continuing Army Corps involvement.
Good. Okay. I just wanted to get some clarity on that one. The other question was on the $160,000 is due to PG&E assigning. The funds will come out of fiscal year 18-19 budget. Is that a typo, or is that?
That would be a typo, yeah. They're currently programmed in the fiscal year preliminary 2019-2020 budget. So you're correct that this staff report is incorrect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other comment? Yes, Vice President Farmer.
Thank you. I realize that there are many people in the community that feel that we need to pursue the possibility of water storage out at the emergency water facility. But I think yesterday's incident with, how could we say it, the declining water infrastructure, and what Mr. Green said, who knows, in his presentation earlier, how many more problems are out there just like that. And, my personal feeling is, with regard to water projects, that item number 3, and let me take my glasses off, water pipelines, pumps, and pressure release valves, I believe what that means, PRV, repairs and replacements. This should be, I think, one of the highest priorities. I mean, we can store all the water that we want, and, water storage is very important. But if we can't deliver it and we have leaks out there, that would, to me, be the major priority as to where our funds should be spent, is on water infrastructure, obviously wastewater as well, but I think this issue yesterday highlights the importance of this item. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Good input. Did the staff want us to make any recommendations at this point? All of this is going to be discussed more at a later time today during the budget discussion, right?
Yeah, there was no intended action by the board on this item today.
Okay.
Certainly, there are recommendations included in the budget, but then there's just the long-term work efforts associated with all of the capital projects and their priorities.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? Yes, Director Rice.
So this is kind of the first step in an ongoing process for evaluating what we need to get done with the infrastructure and maintenance and upgrade,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
First step. And I think the preliminary budget will be the second step, and then R&I will give us some priorities, and we'll go forward from there as to what we can get done. All right. Good. So let's move along to item 3C, which is discussion and consideration of budget adjustment to reflect Tyler software acquisitions. Mr. Ogren?
Yeah, President Pearson, members of the board, our finance manager, Ms. Duffield, is going to discuss this item.
Thank you, President Pearson, members of the board. Item 3C is for your discussion and consideration of a budget adjustment to appropriate the Tyler software acquisition in this current fiscal year 18-19, and also to approve change orders number 2 and 3, and also adopt resolution 27-2019. So during the ad hoc committee meetings and the subsequent finance committee meetings for the budget, we had lengthy discussions regarding current year commitments that we had under contracts, making sure those were in the current year's budget, and making sure we have the provision to roll those into next fiscal year if those commitments were not completed. And in doing that, we had a lengthy discussion about the purchase of the new financial system. And we originally had that budgeted in for 19-20 fiscal year, but in our discussions with the Finance Committee, we went back to the original staff report and realized that the original commitment happened in March of 2018. So that actually should have been carried forward from 17-18's budget into the current fiscal year. We still haven't fully purchased the system, so we do need to carry that into next year. So what got put in this year's budget is just the recurring charges. So we have like the annual maintenance for the system. So that's the only component that got budgeted in this current fiscal year. So we're asking for the $68,000 to be a budget adjustment in this year. And then over and above that, we've had some further discussions with the Tyler Implementation Ad Hoc Committee in purchasing of 2 additional modules that is not included in our base system. That is the fixed asset module and also the work order module. So that adds about $8,000 more to the cost of the system. But in all of our discussions, all of us as staff and the ad hoc committee members felt that that definitely was a good value for the functionality that we gain in the system.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to defer to Mr. Director Howell on this one, since he's the on the ad hoc committee there. You looked at these 2 change orders, and you think they're the right thing to do?
Yes, I do. We had a demonstration from Tyler and Code showing how these 2 modules will work. Excuse me. And in discussions with Mrs. Duffield, Vice President Farmer, and I both came to we all tended to feel that for what the price was, we were getting a very good deal. It's something that we can definitely use. We felt that, and also bearing in mind that had we just gone forward without these modules and then discovered that we really would have wished that we had them, the cost would have been considerably higher. So rather than take, and since my own experience in this area, well, normally I'm very suspicious of software and what it can, how it's going to save us from whatever. Nevertheless, having reviewed it and seeing how the operation presently works, I do think that it is a good decision in general to go forward, and in that I think that the added functionality, the added capabilities that these two modules will provide will justify the rather small increment in cost and in annual maintenance. So it's definitely worth it, I think. That would be the short answer.
Good, great. Thank you. Any other comments on this one, Director Rice?
So I'm having trouble making the numbers seem to come out, and maybe it's just that I'm missing the right numbers, but so these two modules are going to add an additional almost $4,000 to the annual system maintenance, but they are not even a quarter of the cost of to put it in. It says on page 28, it says it'll increase the annual system maintenance by $39.79, which I looked at the two change orders, and that's what they add up to, the $884 plus $30.95. But then it's going to be an additional $4,000 every year on that for the recurring fees? Is that because it's...
That's because it's service.
So they're doing, instead of we're buying that, okay.
Right.
I'm very thankful that we've got folks that are looking at this implementation, and I think the intention of not having it in the budget was to reduce the amount we were over budget when we did the budget last year, because we were in a different situation, and because we thought it wasn't going to be able to be implemented before the end of the fiscal year. So I don't think it was inadvertently left it out. I think we left it out so we weren't as far in the red. But I'm glad that we're on top of it so that we can fix it, so we've got the right amounts in there, because that's really where we need to be, is getting the right answer for that. So I commend Director Howell and Ms. Duffield for working on this, and let's do it. I move that we approve Resolution 27-219.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Vice President Farmer seconds.
And I'd just like to add, at the combined meeting that we had with the various members of staff, Ms. Duffield, our financial officer, as well as our chief plant operators and other members of staff, Melissa Bland as well, they all voiced approval of going forward with this, because it would basically, make record keeping, much more efficient, and they'd be able to exchange information between the various disciplines that exist at our district much easier, and also keeping track of the value of our assets and depreciation, which we weren't on top of at all with the previous software. So this is even though it's an expense, another added expense, sometimes you have to save money to ultimately spend money to ultimately save money and combine your resources efficiently. Thank you.
Good. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Farmer?
Aye.
Director Howell?
Aye.
Director Steidel?
Aye.
President Pearson?
Aye.
President Pearson, sorry to interrupt again. Before we move on, we'll also have to take action to approve change orders 2 and 3 separately.
Okay.
I move that we approve change order 2. Do we have to do them each separately? Okay. I move that we approve change orders 2 and 3 for Tyler Technologies.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Could we have another roll call vote, please?
Director Rice?
Aye.
Vice President Farmer?
Aye.
Director Howell?
Aye.
Director Steidel?
Aye.
President Pearson?
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Carmel, for keeping us on task here. Making sure we do the right thing. Next one up is 3D, which is the bylaws for the standing committees. Mr. Ogren, do you want to introduce this item?
Certainly, President Pearson, members of the board. Quick comment. One is that these bylaws have been evolving even as recently as last week. But I do want to note that in the staff report, we had indicated that there would be attachments, and we really should have deleted that at that point in time due to the nature of the evolving drafts. And with that comment, I think that perhaps Ms. Rice is prepared in order to provide an update and has also provided some drafts for the community. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you. Director Rice.
Okay, so the policy committee last week at a special meeting got together, and at our regular meeting the prior month, we had assigned a subcommittee of Mike Lyons and John Nixon to consolidate the bylaws that were in draft form from each of the two other committees and put something in for our committee. And what we did and accomplished and sent to staff, unfortunately, it ended up through confusion of communication, not being included. But the policy committee had the special meeting because we were tasked with consolidating all of the bylaws into one. And what we did was, and there's some copies at the back, and I think there's some for staff, and the board has some. But what we did primarily, we took the purposes of each of the items that were in the bylaws for each of the committees, and kind of just organized them so they were all kind of consistent with each other and with the bylaws of the board. And the section 1 for each of finance and for resources and infrastructure were about the purpose for the committee, purpose and authority. We did not mess with that part really at all for the purposes, because that's the point of having each of those committees provide that part. So the consolidated version essentially just lists each committee and its purpose, what its charge is as a standing committee. If the purposes and authorities in the consolidated version is something that needs to be changed for a particular committee, that was something that the policy committee said, well, chairs of the committee are on the board, so that can happen as a board discussion if that needs to be changed at that point. If you look at the section 2, and we did renumber them so that it's consistent with the way that the board's bylaws are numbered, so that it would make it all kind of, because we're going to be working on the handbook, which is also going to be consistent, hopefully, formatting. So committee members, this is the section that talks about how we appoint committee members, and how if somebody wants to be reappointed at the end of their term, the terms of service, if there's a vacancy. There are some sections here that may need to be further clarified regarding the appointment of committee members, because there wasn't a lot of clarity. It just kind of said we put it out there that we want to have an opening filled, and it's not very clear what the process is, I think is what I'm saying. And so having a clear process is one of the things that we weren't able to get to, because none of the bylaws of the committees had a very good approach to that, I don't think. Some of the language is a little complex too. And if you look at 2.3D, upon the request of a committee member at the end of a completed term of office with the recommendation of the committee at the direction of the board of directors, the committee member may be appointed for additional 2-year terms in increments. That basically says if you want to stay on the committee, let the board know. The board will say okay or not okay. But it's a very long way of saying that. So there might still be some wordsmithing to be done, but we really wanted to get it here for the board, a recommendation that the board could look at. 2 other quick things. If you look at item 3.3 H on page 2. It says develop meeting calendar approved by the board, and I believe that's something that the board does. Like, I think the committees need to set their dates, but then I think it has to go through the board for approval, that it's all going to fit in together. And that's where we talk about making sure that there's a joint committee meeting for budget purposes, resources and infrastructure and finance and that kind of thing that was in the finance committee bylaws. So we recognize that was and it may behoove us to have some kind of procedure manual, which is what the policy committee is essentially going to be working on going forward, so that we know how those things are done. And similarly, agenda setting, so that we don't have the agendas getting set that are outside what each committee should be doing or what we've asked them to do. Because we definitely don't want to be doubling up work, and we want to try and keep the work of each committee within its purpose, which is kind of the point of having that in the bylaws. And then I just personally had a question. If you look at page 3, number 4.2, this talks about the conflict of interest. Don't we have the committee members filing a 700 form? So that should probably, a statement to that effect should probably be in the bylaws for the committees, or no? Can you speak to that, Mr. Carmel?
I don't think you have to include it in the bylaws. I know staff will pursue it regardless of where it is.
Right.
You may want to include
As
it.
committee members, as somebody who might want to be a committee member,
Should know.
Of course, I'm a little bit of an oddball, but I would be reading the committee bylaws and seeing what my responsibilities might be, and knowing that's potentially one of the expectations. And I don't know how the board feels about having something in there about that.
I'm inclined not to do it, not because it isn't important to that, and I understand what you're saying, but when we start embedding specifics like that into our working documents, basically, it can create issues of either misstatement or duplication just because someone doesn't remember, such and such is embedded here. So I think, personally, you're better off with a controlling document, which is the definition of the 700 having to be filled out, and it stands.
Because we do have that list, yeah. Thank you. That's a clarification. I'm getting a nod from district council on that too. Great. And then, if you look at the last page, I did include the section on committees from the current board bylaws, and we may want to look at it because the standing committees aren't specifically called out as being these 3 policy committees in the board bylaws, and other boards who have standing committees, that's where they put the standing committee and its purpose is in wherever they have their information about committees. I think that's possibly just an option when we get to the bylaws next year for the board. But I just wanted to point out we might want to look at the language there. And then the other question I had, because it's kind of a hard, I'm not even sure how we do it to accomplish it based on Brown Act and timing. But when we get minutes in our board binders and our agenda packets, they're not necessarily approved by the committee yet because we want to make sure we get the information. But if they're not approved, if there's an error in it, like I was expecting it to say that this is actually what happened. So, we occasionally make corrections to our minutes here. So it's not actually a record until it's approved. So when the board receives the minutes from the committees, it either needs to be clearly marked as draft, and then we could be putting out information that needs to be corrected. We have to put it out again. So I don't know how to thread that needle with getting the information to the board about what happened at the most recent committee meeting, but also allowing the committee to officially approve what is their minutes.
Sure. So if the packet that we get says draft, and if the chairman of that particular standing committee who's on the board sees something that is egregious, that needs to be corrected, they can do so. I think that covers because most of the time it's pretty minor stuff to be corrected, but if it's something major, then the chairman of that particular standing committee would be able to say, well, wait a minute, that isn't really what happened, or is not, we need to wait on that particular item until the committee actually approves their minutes. So I think that would be sufficient to have it in our minutes or in our packet and allow us to see what's going on.
Works for me.
Okay. Yes, Director Stidel.
I specifically had a question about item 2.4 that was talking to vacancies.
Yes, this is the section that needs clarity.
The statement is vacancies of unexpired terms of office of regular committee members shall be filled from current applications. Such vacancies shall be filled by appointment of the Cambria CSD Board of Directors. There are two pieces. One is it doesn't address the fact that there may not have been, beyond the committee filing of applications that came in, so you don't have anything to draw from. The other thing is that I think that the board already set precedents in this area for being able to handle vacancies, and that was back when there was a vacancy being made for the policy committee. The March 21st meeting, we reopened the application process with applicants, and we did that for a 7-day period, and it was approved by the board at that time, and it just made it a very straightforward process. I think it does two things. One, it addresses the first item that I had mentioned. The second thing is that it's possible that a vacancy ends up happening a year or so many more months prior to the 2 years, that either the applications you have may no longer be valid, or there may be some other people in the community who feel a real inclination to desire to serve on one of the committees. So I drafted a little bit of I drafted a statement. It isn't one that needs to be included, but I wanted to address it in terms of what I thought maybe we could lead ourselves towards in that statement. And for variances of unexpired terms, a candidate filing period of 7 calendar days shall be opened by the CSD board CSD board direction. The committee vacancy shall be appointed by the CSD Board of Directors from the resulting applications filed, which is basically the process that we followed in the March-April timeframe during that same circumstance.
And I can address that specific one. That particular one kind of rubbed me the wrong way also, because I want to make sure that as many people as possible have an opportunity. So we were going back and forth in the committee, and the committee said, okay, let's let the board decide how they want to handle that, whether they want to go with current applications or have it as Director Stidel stated, how we did it in March, or some other similar way. Now, 7 calendar days, because our paper is only published on Thursdays here, we may want to make it, 2 weeks or something that gives it more wiggle room for getting that into publication if we're going to do that. We also should probably post it at the normal posting places, but your language is good about to the board. Is there?
Yeah, so
my back to the district council, so I'm making sure that we're all good on that.
Yeah, since we're not going to be able to vote on this today,
right?
I would say that if you've got anything that you have an issue with, okay, talk to Amanda, okay, Director Rice, and she's going to take it back to her policy committee and do a very small, I think, rewrite, because I think what they've done here, I must commend that committee, is a terrific job of meshing everybody's desires as to what we want to have as the bylaws for the standing committees. And I think with some very minor revisions, as we've just spoken about, we can get a final for approval at our next meeting. Yes, sir.
President Pearson, just a slight modification, if I might, is that it may be more appropriate to have the director send the correspondence to legal counsel, just to make sure that we avoid any perceptions, at least, of Brown Act issues.
Okay.
And anybody can, if there's any items other than what Director Steidel already raised, if there's items that you'd like to raise today, I will definitely mark them down. And what I'm hearing is that you're going to send it back to the committee for some specific items that are going to be raised either today or through district council. Now, our next regular meeting is on the 28th, which is next week.
Okay.
So the agenda has to be ready for tomorrow, to go out tomorrow. And we definitely do want to try and meet the goals of getting this on the next agenda so that we can have this completed. Are there other sections? I've already got the one marked 2.4.
The other thing from the current board bylaws, paragraph 9.
Yeah.
I do think that would be worthwhile to have included into the bylaws of the standing committees also, just so that there's clarity as to what's going on with that.
I had one other item, and it was just a wording item, and frankly, it may even have been adjusted in the compiling process. So I'll just I'll communicate it. It isn't anything we need to spend our time with.
Just really quickly, action minutes are okay with everyone from the committees? Is there general consensus that action minutes for the committee meetings are appropriate?
May I?
Yes, sir.
On one hand, yes, I would say, but only because since we don't have a dedicated non-committee member as a secretary, it's too much. Had we had staff or a non-committee member as a secretary, I would have much preferred more detailed minutes. But in this case, and apropos of that, if I may just make a couple of comments, I think there maybe should be a provision that each committee, that the secretary shall not be the chairman or vice chairman. That's, in my opinion, too many functions in one person. I personally could not conduct a meeting fairly and be fair to everyone if I was continually having to write down. So I really think that the other committee members, nobody wants the secretary's job. But
that's why action minutes can maybe be advantageous.
Oh, yes.
Because then you're
yes,
just taking the motion
right.
and what the vote was.
Yeah, so for that reason.
We do have recordings also.
Yeah, it's just it's less than an ideal world, but with the resources we have, I think that's the only, if I may make one other comment.
Sure, go ahead.
I kind of wonder that certain aspects of this might actually be more appropriate in the board's bylaws. So not for now, but as we come around to next year, we may wish to address it. For example, issues of how committee members are, how vacancies are filled. That's really probably should not be in the committee's bylaws. That should be in the board's bylaws, I think. And
how we fill the
elements
committees?
like that, and for example, that the chairman does not vote except in a case of a tie. That should not be left up because there's verbiage in here that allows the committees to change their bylaws, and that's something that I do not think they should be allowed to change.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's for later, not for now. We have to go with what we've got, and we won't be addressing our own.
That's what I'm saying. We're going back to committee. So if we go back to committee, and you just said something that surprises me. It said that the committees can change their bylaws, and if that's what's in here,
yes,
they can change
Section
their
8.
bylaws subject to board approval.
Well, maybe that's sufficient. Yeah, that is just sort of caught. And may I say also, I think there's a typo that I should catch now.
Oh, yeah.
7.1, I believe that should be not inconsistent. It's a very strange sentence, and it takes a while to interpret it, but I had to read it 3 or 4 times and then realized it didn't quite.
7.1. So it says, the rules contained in the current edition of Robert's Rules of Orders, newly revised, shall govern the committee in all cases to which they are applicable and in which they are
not inconsistent with these bylaws. I think that was probably in there and it got dropped.
Okay.
There is an issue with Robert's Rules of Order.
Please
I don't know if anyone's actually looked at Robert's Rules of Order, but it's really not geared for small committees. It's geared for the American Automobile Association's annual meeting. We use Rosenberg's Rules of Order, and I'll shoot that to you guys so you see it. That's actually what we use
I
here.
think that's what the NCAC uses too, and the
Right.
committee was going to recommend that. I thought we used Roberts for here.
If
So
you had
that was
Roberts, you
mine.
wouldn't know where to begin, like I
Okay.
don't. So
You're
we may
the
wanna-
parliamentarian. That's where we begin
Well,
with you.
I need to weigh in on this one.
It's
Okay.
it's a 10-page, very simple plate to follow.
I understand that, but Robert's Rules has a considerable chapter on boards, which it absolutely addresses these issues. So I see no reason why we shouldn't use what most of the rest of the country is using.
Well, candidly, they're not used very often anymore.
So Rosenberg's are just a slightly less formal version of Robert's rules, and for most situations are you're gonna end up with the same result of rules, for primarily.
But before I can say more, I'll need to read it.
That's entirely fair, and thank you for that clarification, because I thought we used Roberts here, but apparently we don't. I don't even know what our own board, because we have such collegial meetings, we don't need to resort to the rule book.
Okay.
I know it's hard to believe. The other question, just really quickly, the other question I had was do we want to have anything in here regarding training for committee members? Is there Brown Act training that we want to encourage, if not require? I didn't know if that was something that the board wanted to think about having, because I mean the board, for our purposes, does have some state-required training regarding conflicts of interest and such, but I didn't know if that's something that would be appropriate.
Anyone? I think it would be appropriate to have training on both the Brown Act, just so that they know how to conduct themselves, and the ethics training
Ethics,
that we do
right.
too. So those two should be done.
Okay, we'll
So
add
you can
something
add
in there
that.
about the committee members.
And Director Steidel, you have something else you want to add?
Oh, no,
or-
I was
Okay.
agreeing that the Brown Act and ethics was the other that
Okay.
occurred to me. Thank you.
Good, and those are, is the Brown Act, can we do the Brown Act thing online? Yes? Okay. So both of those are doable online, which
Okay.
makes it easy, so.
Okay, so my charge then is going to be to take this to the policy committee, and anything that we get prior to tomorrow morning, we'll put into the agenda packet. By tomorrow morning, yeah. By tomorrow morning, yes, certainly. So that our staff has time to put together the packet for the committee to look at. We're going to just look at a couple of those concerns and small, insignificant, but wording changes that'll be for our next meeting.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you for your patience, everyone, on
Yep,
this.
and paragraph 8 is the one on amending the bylaws, and that's the one you need to
Got it.
put a little bit of change on.
Got it marked. Thanks. And I got the Roberts Rules thing too.
All right, anyone else?
Yeah, President Pearson, at the R&I committee on Tuesday, a ad hoc committee was established to also take another look, I believe, at the purpose of the bylaws. So a little bit of coordination with their efforts would be appropriate as well, I think.
Yes, I forgot to mention that. Issues of our mission statement and purpose, and I think the bylaws as proposed still allow the committee to discuss its purpose, its goals and objectives. I don't think one precludes the other. At least that's my reading on that.
I don't want to duplicate efforts, but it is true that the statements of purpose, the entire section 1, they're essentially each committee's purpose is a standalone that we didn't change at all anyway. So I think
Right.
if we have that to provide to the directors from your committee for the next meeting, then I think and that's when we will want to, all of us at the board level, make sure that we agree with the purpose for each of the committees, and the clarity is there for the committees, because we all understand right now, but 2 years from now it might be different people sitting here, and we want to make sure that the guidelines are clear. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving on now, we're on item number 3E. And is this Mr. Carmel who's going to introduce this one, or Mr. Ogren? Passing the buck here.
I'll give it a shot. After 6 or 7 months of recruitment that the board's gone through, the board's picked its new general manager candidate. That's Admiral John Weigold. He's here, luckily. Incredible resume. Let me quickly run through the contract terms. In his first 6 months, he'll be paid $155,000. After the first 6 months, it kicks up to $170,000. That's a 5.5-year term contract. There's no severance provision. He gets standard management benefits, fairly lean, and I can go through those if you'd like me to. And that's essentially the boilerplate of the contract.
Yeah, he does have a couple of exceptions to the general administrative benefits in life insurance and then one other one. Right?
Let me go through them out of the contract itself.
And also there's specific wording in there that he will have a performance review done, and the performance template is in there every 6 months. So the board is charged with making sure that we do that on a 6-month basis.
Pursuant to our code, he pays the entire employee designated share of his PERS contribution. Shall be reimbursed standard CCSD mileage rates for district travel outside the San Luis Obispo County in a personal vehicle, 10 days vacation up until February 1st, and then 15 vacation days annually. $100,000 life insurance policy. That's about it. And then there are the standard management benefits. I don't know if you want me to run through those as well.
Does anyone need that done?
I think the public might like it. It
Okay,
won't
go
take
ahead.
too
Sure.
much, right?
I know I brought them.
I have them right here.
Fantastic. Thank you. Health insurance, dental insurance, the $100,000 life insurance policy, 457 supplemental contributions. Those are matched?
Yes, it's $100 match.
Yeah, that's a $100 match per month. Auto allowance, cell phone allowance, internet allowance, health reimbursement account, and the rest has already been spoken.
Okay.
And we're not doing the auto allowance, right? We're doing the mileage outside the county.
Right, solely mileage reimbursement outside the county.
Okay.
With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the process that we went through in doing this. We screened resumes. We probably, at the end of the day, have, as a board, screened 40 resumes. We had an initial group of interviews where we interviewed 4 people, and none of them really cut the mustard, so to speak. So we continued on. We then did some telephone interviews of resumes to whittle down a list again. And at this point in time, we interviewed 2 more candidates, one of which was Mr. Weigold. The interview process was not just board members, but we involved people from the staff who were excellent at asking questions and giving us their perceptions of which candidates were the best. And we also had the chairman of the Pros Commission, Mr. Niffen, who, if any of you know Mr. Niffen, he asked a lot of very good questions and had some very good commentary at the end. So we tried to get a broad spectrum of people to weigh in on who the best candidate was. And after we did that, and we came down and said, okay, Mr. Weigold definitely has the qualifications we're looking for and seems to be the best candidate. We once again brought him in and talked to him at length again. I think it was another 2 hours that we spent at the board as a whole, along with Mr. Ogren, talking to him about the job and making sure that he understood what the job was all about and we understood what he was all about. So it was an extensive search, and we think we have found an outstanding candidate, and I think we're ready to wrap this up and get somebody on board so they can start getting their feet wet. So, Vice President Farmer, please.
So in going through this process, you get feedback from members of the community, and a number of people, I think, spoke to all of us, but certainly just to myself, that, well, please don't do the old same general manager retreads. We already had 2 people that served as general manager that had experience in the past, and look what the result was. Could you approach this in a different manner? So that's what we did. We decided that the qualities of the individual were more important than, let's say, having experience in water and wastewater and whatever else a regular CSD person would have. So now people are saying, well, why did you hire somebody that doesn't know anything about a CSD? So you can't please everyone. We chose, as Director Pearson said, we chose the best candidate. And if I could just speak for myself, and as President Pearson was describing the process, initially there were 3 groups of 4 people each, and so each of us met with the candidates. So as a result, it was a 3-hour session, and then all 12 of us got together and discussed who we felt was qualified and so forth. And I was one of the members of the group that initially was not that impressed with Mr. Weigold for a variety of reasons. But we met with him, whereas other people in the group, they seemed to be more favorable. When we met with Mr. Weigold the second time, I had a much different feeling, a much different impression of the man. And so I feel as if and if I could say this, I've gotten some emails from members of the community that have expressed some not very pleasant comments to me as to why have you folks done this, but especially why have I done this? Didn't we vote for you, Harry, to be on top of this thing? And so I asked some of those folks to come here today to express their concerns. Didn't happen. So I just want to say that my own personal feeling is Mr. Weigold is the best candidate. And how much longer could we do this? Well, as President Pearson said, we've interviewed over 36 folks, or at least examined 36 resumes and interviewed folks. And this has been a 6-month process. And we ultimately had to, make a move. And I don't think we could have found anybody better. And I don't know if I should do this. I'm going to leave this up to President Pearson. We were all given people to contact as to Mr. Weigold's references. And I was given the opportunity to contact his business partner at American Leak Detection, which is where he's been working for a year and a half. And I was fortunate enough to have about a 15-minute conversation with him on the phone. And if I may, I can just quickly give the results of that interview. Is that okay? So this is his business partner is Mr. Michael Dick. And so I call and I tell Mr. Dick what it is that I'm calling for. And the first words he used were, Mr. Weigold is a wonderful man. He said in the 1.5 years that they had worked together, they would be on the phone 5 times a day for 30 minutes discussing whatever needed to be addressed. He said that they had a very successful business relationship. They were very complimentary of one another. He said that the thing that impressed him the most, that he put the business, especially his business partner, put them on the right track and hiring the right people, and that he inspired people at the business to do their best job. And what impressed Mr. Dick the most was the leadership qualities of Mr. Weigold. And he said even if Mr. Weigold wasn't capable, there weren't things that he could be totally on top of. He was able to get assistance in those areas from his business partner. And if I could just say, let me see what else. So I asked him if he would recommend him for employment to this job, and he said absolutely. But what he did say, the only negative thing that he had to say was that he wished he hadn't applied for this job because he's going to miss him, but they're still going to remain good friends. So that was my discussion with his current business partner. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments that want to be made? Yes, Director Steidel.
I just wanted to make a comment to the community also. The idea of being completely technically associated with everything that goes on with the district, I think that we are extraordinarily lucky to have a very strong staff in place. I think our plant operators are strong. I think the rest of our staff is strong. I think that what Mr. Weigold brings to or Admiral Weigold brings to the mix of what we have is a very strong ability of leadership and management of people and problem solving. And I think that is something that, in combination with the technical strengths that we have inherent in our staff organization already, are going to make us extremely successful.
Good. Thank you. Director Rice.
One little thing that we left out on the interviews, the board did choose what questions were going to be used. So the staff did ask the question from a list of questions that the board had determined. It's one of the things that took us a while because we were trying to get the right questions down, and being without a person to help us through that process. No, we didn't hire a headhunter or anybody to, so that's one of the things that ended up taking us a little bit longer. I also want to speak to the fact that it is outside of the box, not hiring the same old retread as Vice President Farmer said. But also, we've got somebody who's going to be a lifelong learner type. He's going to be attending the CSDA General Manager Summit, and so he will get kind of a flavor for what kinds of things happen at CSDs. And I think that it was not an easy decision for me, but we also didn't pull the trigger because we need a GM. Our staff has been handling things. It's not easy because we're missing a very big piece, which is an extra human being to be a leader. So it's good that we're getting somebody, but this isn't something that was rushed into, and we did have extensive discussions about what direction we should take. And I want to set this person up for success is kind of where I came from at the very beginning, and we can't set up somebody for success if they can't do it anyway. So I think we've got a good new GM here if we take a vote on it.
Okay, so we have a resolution here. Do I have a motion to approve the resolution? Yes.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting.
Yes. We have to approve the contract first and then the resolution?
No, I just have something to add to the resolution. Excuse me. Because Mr. Weigold's background check and physical haven't yet happened, right. But they will tomorrow or Friday. We should have this all completed by Friday. I'd like to add to paragraph 2 the following. So it reads, the board president is authorized to execute the employment agreement on behalf of the Cambria Community Services District, subject to completion of a successful background check and physical. I'd like those words added just to clarify. And again, that's probably going to happen by the end of the week.
Okay. We're almost at the end of the week.
I know.
Okay.
His physical's tomorrow, and we're hoping to get the live scan tomorrow as well.
Oh, okay. I thought we already got the live scan. Fingerprint. Isn't that what we did?
We have the receipt, but we
Right.
don't have the results.
Report back from,
Is there any public comment on this item?
no, nobody put in a ticket, believe it or
Okay.
not.
I
Yes,
have to
Director
say, expressing some surprise considering the phone calls I've been getting. So, okay. Okay. The only thing I have to say is to second everything that everyone else has said. I'm very pleased with this candidate, and I think we're very fortunate. If there's I hope there may be an opportunity for the candidate to speak to the public at this meeting. Is that reasonable?
After we pass the resolution,
May I move the
I think
resolution?
we can allow that, yes.
I move the passage of resolution, what is it?
28.
20-2819, right? Thank you.
Second.
Quick clarification, as amended?
As amended.
Second.
Okay, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Howell?
Aye.
Director Rice?
Aye.
Director Stidel?
Aye.
Vice President Farmer?
Aye.
President Pearson?
Aye. Passes 5-0. So subject to the two things were outstanding, we have a new general manager.
Let's introduce him.
Let's. One thing we forgot to tell everybody is that he lives right down the road in Cayucas. So, Mr. Weigold, would you like to speak for a moment?
It is cutting my commute from 6 hours down to 17 minutes.
Yes. So, also, I'm addressing him as Mr. Weigold. I'm not going to be addressing him as Admiral Weigold anymore, okay? I think there's clarity on that. Is that correct?
That's just fine.
Okay.
First of all, thanks to the board for just conducting an incredible process. I've been an executive recruiter for over 20 years, and it was very thorough from my perspective. It's very difficult to run a process like that when you're dealing with committees and subcommittees. As an executive recruiter, managing through that process, both from a client standpoint, i.e. the board, as well as the candidates, a very difficult process. So I thought that was incredibly thorough. I think that your choice of me, I would characterize that if I was sitting on the executive recruiter side as a bold selection. And the reason I say that is because you could have, per Vice President Farmer's comments, you could have chosen a cookie cutter candidate. And sometimes, you don't get what you think you're going to get out of that selection. So I'm not here to pat myself on the back, but we refer to candidates like me as the best athlete. And that means there are characteristics that make me an important candidate in the process to maybe hit some of the issues that you really need addressed. Now, the other part I would say is, from me as a candidate standpoint, that what put my decision over the edge to come here into this role is the strength of the board and the strength of the staff. There are clearly some issues with the public's confidence in the organization of the CCSD here. I think I'm well qualified to handle those. I've dealt with those kind of issues most of my career, whether it's in the civilian side or whether it's on the military side. So I really think I can help get through a lot of the issues. I may not have all the answers all the time. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee it, but I know how to get to the answers, and I know the process to do that. But once again, I'd like to tell the public that they should have great confidence in both the board and the staff. Thanks very much.
Thank you. All right, I would like to call a short, since we're going on to the budget next, I'm going to call a short recess here for 10 minutes. You want 10 minutes? Okay, 10 minutes, quarter till on the clock on the back wall there. We'll reconvene. Thank you.
Pass it off to Ms. Duffield. I don't know if I would get out of the room alive, though, if I did that, because we have a plan, and so I need to stick to it.
All right, so after you introduce, I do have some public comment that I think would be good to take first so that those concerns can be answered, hopefully, while we do the presentation.
Okay. Our plan was that I was going to do the PowerPoint presentation, and it's a summary. But what I'm not sure about, do you want to take public comment prior to the PowerPoint presentation then?
All right, let's do the PowerPoint, and then we can have public comment, because that may generate some more or different, and then we can go ahead and discuss at length from there. Okay.
So as a quick introduction here, that is our plan, that I'm going to provide a summary of the budget. Pam is going to be available to help with some of the detailed questions because she knows the intricacies better than I do. But I also wanted to make sure that John and Jim and Carlos and Melissa are all here today in case there are other questions from staff regarding the various programs and projects that want to be discussed. And before I get into it, I want to make sure to recognize not just the level of effort that we at the district have been doing, but also the committees. Overall, Resource and Infrastructure had several committee meetings regarding capital projects. Today we've already previously discussed the joint meeting with Resource and Infrastructure and Finance. On the finance side, we had 3 ad hoc committees, which was really walking through the process as we were developing the budget step by step. And that feedback, sort of that iterative feedback, was very good. And then the Finance Committee ended up having 2 meetings, including a special meeting for their final review. During this process and really coming to the end and hearing all the different voices and inputs, there were some minor changes, and we'll go through that in the PowerPoint presentation as I proceed. Some of our objectives were to maintain consistency with the Prop 218 process and what your board approved in 2018 under the new rates and charges for the water and the wastewater systems. And also the first Finance Committee meeting, we went step by step through a comparison of the budget policy that your board adopted, I believe it was last December. Overall, the budget is balanced, and toward the end of the presentation, I'll go through a preview of some of the reserves and interfund loan numbers that are really more subject of a subsequent board meeting and adoption of the final budget. But one of the outcomes that I thought was really good this year was working with the Finance Committee and developing the narrative, including trade-offs and goals. Certainly, there's room to improve. I think that this particular budget and some of the feedback that we've been hearing is that it does represent a very good landmark change or a really good success this year for the district. And it really started around in February when we started modifying the budget model, where we recognized that the form of the analysis for the Prop 218, the form of the budgets as prepared on an annual basis, and the form of the mid-year budget reviews were all different formats. And so really starting in February and working with yet another ad hoc committee of the Finance Committee, we wanted to make sure that we had a good budget model or a good financial tool to be able to develop the budget, do mid-year budget analysis, and also to be able to do ongoing comparisons to what the Prop 218 was. And Pam and I were talking briefly this morning about all of the different numbers that are coming from all sorts of different directions. And it can cause your head to spin pretty quickly, even if you are good with numbers. But the importance of that tool has been critical so that we can make sure that they all come together. And so in addition to, appreciation of all the work of the Finance Committee and Resource and Infrastructure, I want to make sure to thank Pam for her engagement, and it was good teamwork, I felt like. And I think it really does set the district up in a good position for consistency in the future. And so in terms of room to improve, the one thought that I've had is in the budget narrative, there's a lot of numbers and there's a lot of explanations that go along with those numbers. And one of the improvements that I think we can add to it is to really come up with like a summary sheet of statistics or critical data associated with the budget, whether it's the increases or surplus or different percentages. That's one of the areas that I think we can add additional value. During today's, I want to make sure that as your board reviews that what was reposted and modified in the budget is an amended salary schedule as compared to the original posting last week, and that's specifically in order to reflect items 3D and 5 that are on the agenda today. So at the appropriate time, I think that a motion that recognizes the amendment to the salary schedule would be appropriate. Also included in this on this agenda item are some other actions, the appropriations limit, which I'll cover later, and then some other information both with respect to obtaining board feedback on some staffing recommendations, and then as I previously mentioned, we've done some initial analysis relating to reserves and interfund loans. And on that point, as a little bit of preview, I think that the budget as proposed for next fiscal year, it's balanced overall, it's consistent with the Prop 218, and I think that the angst is, as we will see, and as many or most people have anticipated, the status of reserves and status of interfund loans still have some significant work or some significant decisions down the road for your board to make. So with that then, I'll get into the exciting part of the numbers. Next slide. Not sure sometimes this clicker works. There they are, they disappeared. So a little bit hard to read here, but as indicated, the budget is balanced overall. And one of the keys is 100% administrative cost recovery. And I mentioned that because when we close out the current fiscal year and we look at what were the results of this fiscal year and how do they roll over into next year's fiscal year's reserves, we did note that in current year and some prior years, there haven't been 100% cost recovery. So it's not an action item for today, but we will be, when we close out the current fiscal year and come back to your board, we'll be identifying those numbers specifically in the event that you want to make adjustments, which would be appropriate when you're considering direction on an interfund loan as well. The other thing I want to mention is that where I mentioned that it's consistent with the Prop 218, in the Prop 218 for next fiscal year, there was an assumed interfund loan to water of about $250,000 and an assumed deficit of about $57,000. So overall it's balanced, overall it's consistent with the Prop 218, but there were certain assumptions that are still holding true with regard to interfund loans and some deficit assumptions. This chart really shows the general fund budgets, the enterprise budgets, and then eliminating adjustments. In part, this was requested by the Finance Committee. Mr. Siegler had a lot of, very positive inputs because individuals were talking about a $12 million budget. Well, that includes about $2 million of interfund loans. And so if we back those out, the CSD really has a budget of about $10 million or about between $10.5 million and $11 million. The general fund budgets combined are looking at a surplus of about $17,000, which for all practical purposes is just a balanced budget. And the enterprise funds, from an operational standpoint, are looking at about a $67,000 surplus. We'll go through some of those details because those are consolidated numbers. most of this presentation is going to relate to some of the graphics that you would see in the property in the narrative. This pie chart illustrates the property tax allocation, and there's a couple important takeaways here. There's a relatively small amount of about $25,000 that goes to the wastewater fund, and that allocation to the wastewater fund is in order to pay for the low-income discount program that underneath Prop 218, the districts, your board, doesn't have the discretion to authorize discounts that are then paid for by other water customers because Prop 218 requires what we call the proportional allocation of costs. And so with the implementation of a discount program, it really needs to be funded by property tax revenues. We know that some of that was hit and miss in the past. That will be incorporated into interfund loan analysis in terms of past efforts. But for next year, it's an estimate of about $25,000. Your board is also considering low-income discounts on the water fund. And as you proceed in those deliberations, it's important to recognize that that might also have some impacts in terms of the allocations of property taxes. PROS is the small green slice, and the important point that I was informed of is that PROS is really about the development of new facilities and looking at, how does Cambria better meet the needs of the community, as opposed to facilities and resources budget is more about maintaining those responsibilities that and services that the district has chosen to undertake. So the two big components of the pie chart, of course, are fire and facilities and resources. And in some respects, meeting the minimum operating requirements of the fire department drives the property tax allocation and how much goes to fire. We know that there's desires associated with permanent staffing, increasing permanent staffing of the fire. This budget is based on consistent staffing levels with the current year. The remainder of the tax pie and its allocation to facilities and resources is really the best that the district can do right now. And in some of the attachments, we have identified unbudgeted requests. And so for facilities and resources, there are significant unbudgeted requests. There are concerns about continuing maintenance of the Vets Hall, as well as some of our open spaces. And yet we know that districts and allocations of property taxes are set by Proposition 13 and state law, and your board's authority is really pretty limited unless there's a tax election out there. So there are continuing concerns regarding unbudgeted items, and I bring that up because one of the things that I've encouraged the managers to do is to always submit those requests. It's too easy to have a request and say, well, it didn't get funded last year and it didn't get funded the year before. It's not going to get funded, so I'm not going to request it. And the answer is no, you have to consistently continue to make the request. It's important that that's out on the table. It's part of being transparent, and it's part of informing the community what are we able to get to and what are we not able to get to. And then the last thing that we speak to in the narrative a little bit is the potential for other revenues that would help. And two of those specifically, one is that in the very near future, your board is going to be considering the garbage rates. Mission Country Disposal has put forth a need for a rate increase. Currently, the district's franchise fees are based on 6% of gross revenues. Many of the communities throughout San Luis Obispo County have franchise fees that are based on 10% of gross revenues. William Statler, who's the rate consultant on those efforts when it comes forward to your board, is my understanding that he'll be evaluating both the proposal from Mission Country Disposal as well as what impacts would be if the franchise fee revenues might change. And then the other one is with respect to fees on the Vets Hall themselves. And I understand that there was a rate analysis that was done a few years ago, and I think it's easy to acknowledge the challenge with fees associated with the Vets Hall is that if they're structured to be full cost recovery so that we can make sure everything gets maintained, the challenge there is it sometimes drives away users, and it has then less benefit for the public. So there's a balancing act there for sure. And then lastly on fire, Incorporated in the fire department budget is approximately $75,000 for Pam. Slipping my mind. Is it fire department security system or is his equipment that he's got a grant out there for? The radios, yes. And so Chief has been through, these kind of grants often take multiple steps through an application process. He's been successful through 2 steps. The discussion with the Finance Committee, is it more probable or less probable? The fact that the Chief has gotten through 2 of the steps already for the grant process. We included the grant revenues within the budget. In the event that the district is not successful in the grant, in obtaining the grant, the discussions with the Chief is that some of his other equipment purchases need to be deferred until we find out whether or not we are successful in the grant, because if we're not successful, Chief is very strong that the radios need to be replaced. So we'd be back in front of your board in order to say, okay, what other items in his equipment list might we need to defer, and or are we going to have to tap into reserves a little bit in order to purchase those radios. So I should also say that as I'm moving along, feel free to ask questions as I proceed. Next slide. Quick little pie chart on the administrative cost allocation. I know that as a summary, that's where we have, this is essentially our overhead charges, whether it's administrative staff or some of the telephone charges, and how do those get allocated to the different operating budgets. The majority of it, or almost half of it, is allocated to water, with about a quarter to wastewater, and the other 25% allocated between the different general fund budgets. I mention this because there's always a certain level of discussion about the equity of administrative cost allocations. My understanding is that this was reviewed in 2018. We're following a consistent formatting. With respect to overhead, it's the guiding principles of budget and accounting is maintain consistency. It doesn't mean that you can't change it. You certainly can change it. Generally frowned upon to change it from year to year, just to kind of try to make the budgets work however they might work. But a review every 3 to 5 years is certainly appropriate. But
yeah,
again,
let me interrupt, please.
Certainly.
The changing of it year by year was the issue that we tried to address and tried to nail down exactly how we wanted to consistently do it in the future, so that we weren't penalizing one fund or one department or something like that.
Yeah, and from an overhead standpoint, it's understandable that in some years administrative staff may be having a greater focus on certain areas, and other years there's a greater focus on another budget. But it's the idea that over multiple years, it's equitable. And if you wanted to get more into the details, Pam would certainly be as well versed in discussing the details associated with those calculations.
Excuse me, Jim Ogren. I just wanted to mention, just as simple reference and for some orientation for the community, when these allocations happen, they don't happen a singular way. The actual individual line items or costs are looked at and categorized in one of 4 different methods for allocation across the resources, depending on what the cost is and how it should be assessed. So it's a functional evaluation of the cost and distribution to where they should reside.
Thank you. Next slide. I got it. Moving into some of the enterprise funds, these we have for water and a couple of different water funds, but also for wastewater. The bar charts here are intended to compare what's in the proposed budget versus the categorically in comparison to the Prop 218 estimates. To highlight for the water fund and all of them, personnel services that are being proposed, or the cost of labor essentially, is quite a bit lower than what the Prop 218 estimates are. That is most significantly because of the deferral of the utility manager position. That's a new position, not to be confused with agenda item number 5, but historically we've had the district engineer who's also the manager, and through the Prop 218 process, it identified the need for additional staffing. And prior recommendations that I provided to the board was to defer that decision to make sure we identify how to best. Is it really a utility manager that's needed or a project manager? And the goal is to have the recommendations to your board by the end of the calendar year, which really in then effect would probably go into effect next fiscal year. So there are some significant savings projected. Services and supplies for the water fund are essentially consistent, as well as capital outlay in total with the Prop 218 estimates, and the administrative cost allocations are slightly higher. I think some important items in water itself, this administrative cost allocation, when we look at the SWF funds, there are no administrative cost allocations. That the Prop 218 analysis for water had all of the administrative cost allocations in the water fund, and so that's just sort of a noteworthy point there. Moving to some of the capital outlay priorities for is the water line crossing across the pedestrian bridge, which is currently in design and will be out to bid and constructed in the upcoming fiscal year. And then working through R&I and the remaining of it is really for two different areas, the SCADA system, which is our electronic controls, and for the meter replacement. So subsequent work has to be done where staff will then work with R&I in order to identify specifically how much do we propose on the SCADA system this year and what are the proposals, as well as what are we going to be proposing on meters this year in terms of types and types of units, as well as the dollar amount. But we do have a little bit of unfortunate news, and that is that Jim went out and tested the generator system for the San Simeon well field. PG&E has been having these discussions regarding brownouts, and we're finding that the generator for the San Simeon well fields is not sufficient. It was tested, I believe, last fall, and it was fine, but it's just not producing the power. It's an older unit, and so immediately we're going to have to be embarking on looking at the replacement. It was on the prioritization list. It just wasn't up at the number 1 level, and so again, we're going to have to work with R&I, and it appears that we're going to have to make some adjustments for that.
2 questions.
Okay.
One is that generator currently within the air pollution requirements, or do we need to replace it for that reason also?
Yeah, Jim, if you could come up to make sure that we're speaking, but my understanding is it's about to be obsolete in the near future.
Yeah, we've got about 2 more years, and then the ACPD will no longer permit us.
Right.
Right. So
okay. So
that's why it had been.
We got to move ahead
at
anyway.
the end of the year, possibly next year. But with these rolling blackouts, this has just really forced our hand to, adjust the priority level on that.
Okay, good. Second is on the meters replacement. Is the board going to approve what meters you guys are talking about doing, or are you guys going to make that decision yourself, or R&I going to weigh in? How do we make the decision as to what meter technology basically we use?
Yeah, I was anticipating we would be working through R&I. The dollar value of the meter purchases is most likely going to have it in your board's court.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next slide with respect to the water fund is really a stacked bar chart to show the different components and how they add up and how they compare to the overall revenues. And so the water fund itself is probably the best news that's out there because the revenue bar is taller than the expenditure bar. by about $195,000. So the projected surplus for the water fund itself is helping balance the budget, and we all know that there's concerns with SWF. And this just simply gives, a little chart on what the different components are. That type of a stack bar chart is sometimes good to start with. It can be good too for future years in comparing, how does the change in labor or how does the change in services and supplies or capital outlay look from one year to the next. But the primary takeaway here is that the revenue bar is taller than the expenditure bar. Moving into the SWF fund, there's a few more notes here, and I think we all recognize that some of the challenges fiscally are more associated with SWF. To the right, I want to quickly point out, because it's been a significant topic of board interest, is to make sure that we've programmed the 2 month of operating reserves, which is $173,000 for next fiscal year. In order to fund that, later you'll see that it really does require the interfund loan in order to do that. But we do have the provisions to make sure that the 2 month of operating reserves are included in the budget. As previously noted, the Prop 218 had all of the administrative cost allocations in the water fund and not the SWF, so that's why this is blank. And then with respect to services and supplies and capital outlay, we'll notice that those two particular comparisons are almost the opposite. That services and supplies is notably higher than what the Prop 218 budget had assumed, and that capital outlay is notably lower than what the Prop 218. And that is because of the difference between a verb and a noun, as Mr. Siegler will point. So one of the focuses for SWF for next year is the pickling of the membranes in order to make sure to preserve them. The pickling of the membranes, after working with finance, was deemed to be a verb and not a noun, and therefore it's services and supplies, and it's not an investment in capital outlay, and so that's the difference there. The two of them, essentially help balance each other. And so we do see that in some of the assumptions, and it makes sense, where in a Prop 218 process and when the consultants are looking at numbers on those major categories, that when we move forward into a particular year, we're trying to be more precise. It's more precise from a budgeting standpoint, and it's more precise from ultimately what gets capitalized. And so we're not looking at, pickling as a capital expense, but it is an important expense associated with preserving the capital facilities that we have. Also within the capital outlay, we have the tank replacements. Currently, we're renting tanks from Rain for Rent, and so as soon as we have the impoundment basin cleaned out and everything taken care of, we're going to try to get those tanks back to Rain for Rent, purchase some used ones, and then there's some site preparation costs as well in order to make sure that anything that might leak out is properly contained. Lastly, within the capital, there is a relatively modest amount for environmental consultation, especially with resource agencies, federal resource agencies, and I say a minor amount because most of that was already budgeted in the current year, and because those efforts have not moved into a full stream effort, most of that money is going to roll over from the current year into next year. So there's some additional funding that's put into next year's budget, but all together with the rollover money, it will be sufficiently funded. Too far. And then again, here's the SWF revenues and expenses. As mentioned in the Prop 218, this is our revenue chart, and the green, appropriately green, that's our limit of revenues. In order to make sure the budget is fundable, the Prop 218 assumed about $250,000 in an interfund loan for the current fiscal year. For next fiscal year. It also assumed about $250,000 in interfund loan for the current fiscal year, which we didn't have to do, or didn't have to do fully. So there is a little bit of good news that the interfund loans have not yet been as extensive as predicted, although we're not done, with the regular coastal development permit either. But that's what these two, the $57,000 deficit assumption from the Prop 218 and the interfund loan from the Prop 218. Overall, the expenditures are, again, almost right on with the Prop 218, $6,180 under. So one of the goals, again, is to try to make sure that we're living within the 218 and the revenues that were approved overall. Moving then to the wastewater fund, this does include one of the two most significant assumptions that I'm concerned about the Prop 218 analysis, and it's services and supplies. When we look at the trends associated with services and supplies for the wastewater fund, we see prior year expenditures that were $840,000. In general, we see prior year expenditures ranging from $750,000, maybe a little bit less, to $850,000. And the Prop 218 assumption was that we were going to be down like about $669,000, or significantly less. And even the current year's budget, we already during the budget review, mid-year budget adjustments, your board had to increase the appropriations to services and supplies. We're not seeing a big drop-off in the cost there that was estimated in the Prop 218. And one of the numbers that just jumps out at us real fast is the cost associated with energy. And so when we look at some of these assumptions, and I'm going to want to make a side note real quickly for Director Steidel and the Finance Committee, because during the budget discussions and a lot of the public questions during the budget discussions related back to the Prop 218, and so we know that there's more digging we want to do in terms of the Prop 218 assumptions and working with the Finance Committee on that. But what appears on services and supplies is almost that those numbers were reduced, assuming that the upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant or the upgrades to the lift station were almost happening instantaneously, because we do expect that with upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant, we should expect a decrease in energy costs and a decrease in some of the maintenance costs. Certainly that's part of the PG&E analysis is expectations on energy costs. And then on overall services and supplies, as the lift stations are maintained and upgraded and brought up to current day standards, the idea of reducing services and supplies associated with maintaining those lift stations is also a reasonable assumption. It just appears right now that the assumption and the savings in those costs was too quick. It's almost as if, those improvements in the wastewater treatment plant upgrades was going to happen instantaneously. So that's one of the two Prop 218 budget assumptions that really jumped out at us, and so we've budgeted a dollar value that is more consistent with actual expenditures and the needs of John and the wastewater operations. I should also point out that for the wastewater fund and also for the water fund, 3 positions that were incorporated into the Prop 218 analysis are in here, 1 for water and 2 for wastewater collections.
And those are fully funded for the entire year?
Correct.
So through the hiring process, we'll probably save a little bit of money there.
Yes.
Okay.
And let's see. With respect to capital outlay, it's self-budgeted at the dollar amount, living within the means of the Prop 218 analysis. The highest priority is the $160,000 for the PG&E turnkey project. And there was a little bit of discussion earlier about, is it going to include 12 projects or is it not going to include 12 projects during the prioritization discussion, and the fact that ultimately it's going to come back to the board. There's due diligence efforts that we've identified that we need to do before coming back to the board with recommendations, both with finance and with resource and infrastructure. John has started providing me some feedback on those due diligence efforts. But one of the things that is important to really recognize up front is that in order to do the PG&E turnkey project at whatever level is deemed appropriate to your board, it's really going to result in the conversion for future years of some of the capital outlay estimates and move them into debt service. I've heard a little bit of discussion because, we generally don't like paying interest. We'd rather be able to pay with cash. But that discussion of how much debt is appropriate to pay for wastewater treatment upgrades is going to be, an important upcoming discussion. And with those who are more sensitive about paying for interest, the thought is that we all have to remember that when we're paying interest, it's on a declining balance as we're paying off the debt. But inflation hits us on, a balance that increases because every year everything starts getting more expensive. So there's, certainly benefits. The type of funding can be very important. If we can get the funding through USDA or some of the other governmental programs that provide subsidized interest rates, then that will be good, or some other programs. And that is part of the PG&E turnkey, is to help us identify funding for those wastewater treatment plant improvements. I should mention also that in the capital outlay budgets for wastewater as well as water, there are some equipment requests in there that had to be balanced in there. For wastewater itself, the priorities that we're looking at, in addition to the $160,000 for the turnkey project, backing up, there's more costs associated with the upfront on PG&E. The idea is $160,000 cash, next fiscal year. The remaining balance, which is around $360,000 or $340,000, gets incorporated into the long-term project funding. If the district doesn't move forward with the PG&E project, then we would have to, next fiscal year, budget that remaining balance. But with respect to the other priorities for wastewater, the vac truck and the camera equipment. And so that's in order to help with moving forward with the SSMP programs and the sewer system, which is the sewer system management plan, regulatory requirement. But we already know that we can't fund the vac truck 100% with cash on what's in the capital outlay budget. So again, working with finance, especially, and looking at funding options for the vac truck, we're going to have to determine how much is going to have to come out of the current year's budget, how much might be affecting future year's budget under a financing scenario. The camera equipment, we figure we can fund without any type of debt. But these vac trucks are, I don't know if people have seen them, going around. They're expensive pieces of equipment. They can be, north of $400,000. So we will have to look at financing for that. And then again, our stack bars to compare our revenues and our expenses. Wastewater has got some miscellaneous revenues because of standby charges that predated Prop 218. And I didn't have any other notes on my PowerPoint, so there it is, another stack bar. At this point, I want to just pause real quickly, though, because I'm going to move into the other related topics and see if there's any other questions regarding, the water or the wastewater fund budgets. And yeah, I only have a couple more slides on the other topics. So the other topics are the appropriations limit, which has its own resolution. Some of our staffing recommendations that we would like to have feedback from your board on, and then some of the unaudited analysis associated with reserves and interfund loans. The second and third bullet don't require any formal direction today from your board. The first bullet is a standard item that does require board action. So this is a little bit hard to read, and there's details associated with these numbers that we would probably put everybody to sleep on if I talked to them about them too long. But essentially, the GAN limitation was passed by the state legislature shortly after Proposition 13 was adopted. And so we all know Proposition 13 because that limits how much you have to pay in property taxes. It limits how much the public agencies will get in property taxes. But subsequently, the GAN limitation established, well, property taxes could go up real fast, and so the state wanted to establish a spending limit as well. That spending limit, adopted originally in the late 1970s, goes up for increases in inflation and it goes up for increases in population. And you have to do a test every year to say, hey, out of the property taxes we collect, are we allowed to spend it, or do we have to give some of it back? And essentially, it is rarely ever an issue, and it's rarely ever an issue because after Prop 13 and the GAN limits were approved, the state shifted property taxes from special districts and counties and cities over to school districts. And so those property tax shifts then had the effect of reducing our property tax revenues, but our limitations still kept going up. So Cambria, as well as many of the special districts in the county, simply don't have a spending limit. We have a revenue limitation. So I guess it's kind of a way of saying we have to formally adopt that resolution, but there are no concerns associated with it. And then moving to the staffing recommendations, this I touched on a couple months ago when I was bringing some organizational recommendations to your board. And we have two positions especially that I think the timing with the management analyst and the deputy district clerk is the concept of a career progression. And so currently both positions are 1 levels, and like wastewater operators, like water operators, who we have water operator 1s and 2s and 3s. I know it's my recommendation and seeking some board feedback on these two positions to be able to have career series. And it's not just about, more money or anything else like that. It's actually about increasing levels of responsibilities as individuals progress in their career. And the management analyst position, which was originally envisioned as a compliance officer, is certainly doing vast more work than originally envisioned, doing work extremely well. And there's not an action item because if your board is supportive of this concept, then we would have to, modify job specifications and work with everybody in terms of what are those increasing levels of responsibilities, some of which, again, the individuals are already doing. And with respect to the deputy district clerk, both working, this individual as well as the district clerk, Monique, big portion of responsibilities are records retention in room that I believe that the district has room for improvement is in our overall contract administration. All of the contracts that come through the board are done very well. They're coordinated through the clerk's division coordinated with legal counsel. Room for improvement within the district is those items that don't go through your board and include things ranging from purchase orders or some of the smaller procurement issues. So, again, I think that it's both with respect to existing duties that individuals are doing as well as, goals for improvements within the district. Overall, the proposal at this level 2 salary schedule is to recognize that the level of responsibilities, it's not the same as the chief plant operators, but the work between these individuals and the chief plant operators themselves are critically tied together. And then lastly, again, a chart that's not easy to read, but which we have handouts. And so there should be a lot of handouts for individuals as well as board, and I'll give you all a chance to sort of see if you found your handout. There's one that shows rows and columns and ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and this is the last slide of this presentation. And this is really a preview for what your board will be considering during the final budget. and that is what's our estimates of reserves. As a little bit of a background, the preliminary budget, the purpose of the preliminary budget is to establish the revenue and expenditure plan for next year. The final budget, which has to be adopted by statute prior to September 1st, is really to give staff the opportunity to close out the current fiscal year, to develop an estimate of what kind of reserves are rolling over from the current fiscal year to next fiscal year, and then incorporate the reserves into the final budget. And on that point, that's the second point where, just like services and supplies for wastewater, the reserve estimates associated with the Prop 218 may not have been as good as they might have been. What we start at the very first line then is cash in bank per audit, and that was June 30, 2017. So all of those numbers there come right out of the audit worksheets, and they reconcile to the audited financial statements. And on a bottom line basis, they show that the general fund has about $3.756 million. Wastewater fund had a negative cash of $584,000. And then we have the numbers for water department, SWF operations, SWF capital. And the SWF capital is one that has been spoken about at the committee levels, especially because many members of the community recognize that the SWF capital is supposed to have reserves, and the analysis indicates that in fact it does. It's the operations in the water department that have run into the negatives. On a combined basis, however, as of June 30, 2017, total water fund reserves were about $209,000. Again, cash-based reserves, that doesn't take into account things like accounts receivable and accounts payable and other current assets and other current liabilities. But when we fast forward then to June 30, 2018, which have not been audited yet, those numbers are currently being audited. But Alan previously, I picked up this analysis off of Alan's worksheets, which are on the opposite side of this paper, but I'm not going to get into the details on them. But he illustrated what were our increases or decreases for last fiscal year, 2017-18. In all funds, he indicated that we were having operating deficits. And so that's why those are all negative numbers. The estimate of June 30, 2018 then, total district-wide is about $2.5 million. And the thing that jumps out at me is that the general fund indicates it has $3.5 million, but all the enterprise funds add up to a negative balance of $1,052,000. That's the sort of the hole, I guess, that the district, I don't want to say the district dug itself into, but found itself in, and was really that deficit and the drain on reserves was significant in the 2017-2018 year. Down below, and I'll speak to how does that affect interfund balances. But with respect to 2018-19, the current fiscal year, the changes reflect those numbers that were reviewed by your board during the mid-year budget analysis as late as May. Now, these numbers are going to change somewhat when we finish the 2018-19 audit as well. And they'll also change somewhat based on the Tyler budget adjustment that your board approved earlier today. But, revenues are going to differ. All the expenses are going to differ. So these numbers are going to be changing. But based on the mid-year budget analysis, the estimated reserves at June 30, 2019, district-wide, will go up from the prior year by about $200,000 to $2.7 million. For the general fund, they went down a little bit. For the wastewater fund, they went up a little bit. Combined waters for the current year, they're going up. And combined enterprise fund, they're going up. And that's simply a result of the Prop 218 rate increases that went into effect. Then when we take what is in the preliminary budget for the current year, we have an estimate of cash-based reserves at June 30, 2020. And that's an important number to look at because that's really then the numbers that we'll be comparing to when we come back to your board in terms of interfund loans. And the need for interfund loans is a lot going to be based on the need for catching up in the last couple of years. It was last August, I believe, that your board approved an interfund loan of about $466,000, and that was only for subsidies, operating subsidies that occurred as of June 30th of 2016. So we still have some catch up to do on the interfund loans. The big concern there is going to be, okay, how do the enterprise pay the money back to the general fund, and what are those implications in comparison to the Prop 218 numbers? And so that's why I say that's the sort of the second variance from the Prop 218 analysis that concerns me. Your board has a lot of discretion on how to do those interfund loans, whether you're going to do it over many years, the degree to which you charge interest. We are looking at and we're cognizant of the interfund loan policy that your board has adopted. My quick statement here is that if money is lent out from one of the enterprise funds, it has to be at market rate interest. When the general fund loans money out, it's your board's discretion at any interest rate, and actually it's your board's discretion as to whether or not you're going to require repayment. So those are, a little bit of preview of some of the, challenging issues that are going to be in front of your board in the very near future. Moving down to this section on interfund loans then, that's a quick reconciliation of what's on the books right now. There's a $466,000 interfund loan from the general fund to wastewater. We've talked about that at several meetings. There's also a $157,000 interfund loan from the general fund to the water fund, which I think may have gotten lost a little bit in history, and Pam was able to research that and provide that information to the auditor. But in terms of all these numbers that we're looking at right now, it would appear that the interfund loan for wastewater needs to increase by $635,000, and then the interfund loan for water will have to increase $226,000. And I compare the $226,000 is actual favorable compared to the Prop 218 estimate of $250,000. And if we added in the $57,000 estimated operating deficit under the Prop 218, that $226,000 is favorable as compared to what's essentially about $307,000. At the end, the estimate of cash-backed reserves for the general fund would be about $2.6 million, but they would also have, and I don't think I have this number in here, well over $1 million or $1.5 million in receivables from the other funds, but those receivables are not current assets, and therefore they don't really work themselves into the budget as reserves. For the water fund, you see the $173,000 that's set aside underneath the plan for the SWF and the 2 months of operating reserves. So there's a lot to digest. I wanted to make sure that, and based on board request, to actually get these, initiate some review of these numbers. Again, no action on this today. This is something that will be brought back to your board during the discussions of the final budget with options and alternatives for your board to discuss. And with that, I'd be glad to answer questions.
All right, let's go ahead and have the public comment now. We're going to start with Elizabeth Bettenhausen, and following her, we'll have Mary Mahler, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm glad to be here today. And I should welcome to the complexity of CCSD. I only have two major points. They are written out here for your perusal. The Finance Committee will not be surprised, and neither will the excellent finance manager we have, Ms. Duffield, and the excellent interim general manager we have, Mr. Ogren, because they've heard me say this before. But you, dear board, have not, and so I tell you, and I tell the public who might be listening, wishing that I could post these on the screen, but that's not allowed to us, so I'm sorry I can't. But the first point is very simple. $381,567, that's about $350,000, give or take, is moved over from SWF to water. I asked you last time to tell me what the policy-making decision was there. Nobody told me, so I went back and looked at all of the meetings since the Bartle Wells reports began in 2018. There is no public action on this by the board, no policy action. The only action, and I quote it to you down at the bottom, is when you were discussing the fiscal year budget for this year, 18-19, the motion was made and passed, quote, to provide direction to the staff to have the deficits in the SWF fund be covered by the excess money in the water fund. That was passed. Didn't say whether it was for that particular fiscal year, whether it was a policy ad infinitum. I have no idea what it really meant. And I certainly do not know what it meant by the two words in excess. And the question I pose to you today is whether this might include the material you have on page 125 of your agenda today, namely all of the projects that the Water Fund would like money for. But now $300 and some thousand is going to be spent on the allocation for administrative costs that was before, also in the 2018-19 budget, friends, allocated and costed to SWF, not water. And I'm raising this because it gives the public a very bad impression to think that we are better off financially than we really are in SWF, because over $300,000 disappears into water and is not allocated as a cost to SWF. So that is my point number one. And I want to read the statement I make at the bottom of page 1. I am also rather offended that the Prop 218 rate increase adopted last year gave no indication that expenditures for the SWF could be funded by revenue from the Water Fund 11 also. In other words, Bartle and Wells never proposed this, and I went back, unless my eyesight at the age of 76, almost 77, is getting really crappy, I saw no evidence whatsoever of this discussion in Bartle and Wells, so it's one of the assumptions that you need to take into account. The other point is in your budget proposed, and I'll try to be quick here, look on page 2, please. My question is, since Bartle and Wells did no analysis whatsoever by line item of medical insurance and PERS retirement payments, but only gave 2 lump sums, how do you account for the fact that these are increasing dramatically, not in fire and not in resources, but in all the other departments, including, for example, PERS retirement goes up 43%. Medical insurance, 91%, and there's no indication in the narrative, friends, that this is because of new staff or anything. That's not there. So I urge you, even though oddly enough you don't have to act on the resolution in your agenda packet today, apparently, I ask you to explain to the public why medical insurance and PERS retirement payments are going up, up, up at that stunning rate for all the departments except fire and resources, which sound quasi-reasonable. I'm sorry for trying to get my 3 minutes in. Thank you for your excess time allotment, Mr. President, and I wish you well in the short remainder of the day.
Thank you. Yes, I also have been wondering about the PERS issue and would like, when we come back with the final budget, to have some kind of reconciliation as to what's going on with PERS and how much we owe, and are we catching up or falling behind with that kind of thing. So I know you're preparing that, right, Ms. Duffield, anyway? That's part of the audit.
I have that information right now if you want to discuss it now.
Okay?
Are we talking the unfunded liability? I assume is what you're talking about.
Quick, do we want to take all of public comment first? So that
Yes, we can.
Okay.
We can get back to this. That's fine. And I'm not sure that we want to go into this today unless, you've got all the numbers and everything on all the PERS stuff. But yes, we'll go ahead and entertain Ms. Mahler now. Thank you. And she'll be followed by Mr. Schwartz.
Good afternoon, almost evening. So I was motivated to attend and speak at today's meeting after watching the May 23rd CCSD meeting on video. At that meeting, members of the community and even one of the board members complained repeatedly about past and current CCSD board decisions. In a nutshell, public comment and some board discussion was very negative and counterproductive. I would like to take the opportunity to talk about some positive things I see as a member of the community. I am on the CCSD Finance Committee and have also participated in several of the ad hoc budget committee meetings with CCSD leadership. I want to note that the following comments are my own personal opinion, and they're not, the board, my committee's opinion. So during these meetings, I've been impressed with CCSD leadership's dedication, responsiveness, and desire to be fully transparent, in all budget matters. They are very familiar with the infrastructure projects and our new water facility and how important each is to our community. It is very evident that they have a solid grasp of our financial situation and are making every effort to improve our financial position and at the same time provide visibility to the community. I urge the board to fully support CCSD leadership by endorsing the 2019-20 fiscal year budgets. And I also want to personally thank the CCSD leadership and the CCSD board. In my view, you're all doing a good job and deserve the community's full support. Thank you.
Thank you. Crosby Schwartz.
Good afternoon, President Pearson and members of the board. I'd like to follow up on some comments that Mr. Ogren made about the cost for the PG&E turnkey, the next phase of the PG&E turnkey. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The cost of the next phase of the PG&E turnkey project. The total cost estimated, if we go forward with all 12 projects, is $542,000, and the current budget shows $160,000 as the initial payment, and there's no other comment about the fact that there's also going to be a balance too on that of $382,000. My recommendation to you would be to see if PG&E has a draft of the contract that you'll be signing. I'm pretty sure that will tell you what the repayment schedule is for that $382,000. It may have to be paid in the upcoming fiscal year, or it certainly would have to be repaid if we do not arrange to have it included as part of the construction funding. So the fact that that $382,000 doesn't show up in this proposed budget at all, I have a problem with that, and I think you need to confirm that if it does not have to be repaid in the upcoming fiscal year, that's fine, but we can't just wish that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that the public more?
That's it.
That's it.
That's
okay.
it.
I guess what I would like to do first is provide some general responses, and then
Sure.
depending on your board, Pam could follow up with some of the details. And sort of going in reverse order here, Crosby Schwartz does identify, a good point. And in that narrative, I think I was supposed to put that in there, and I knew that there was going to be at least one thing that I didn't get into that narrative. And that hopefully that's the only item. But this budget is not the approval of the PG&E turnkey project, and really when that contract comes back in front of your board, and depending on what that language is, then all of those other things are going to be considered. At this point in time, though, It's clearly the district's intent to utilize the PG&E turnkey project, and therefore the need to anticipate expending another $382,000 in the current fiscal year, just that doesn't exist. It's more of a contingent liability in the event that the district chose not to move forward. But again, I think that that's part of the due diligence efforts, and has to be fully addressed as well as other items, because to me, it's not whether we're going to proceed with anything under the PG&E turnkey project. It's the extent to which. Are we going to be able to capture 8 projects? Are we going to be able to capture 12 projects? My judgment right now is that it probably will not include all 12 projects, but that's also going to depend on what do the cost estimates come up with the different projects. I would anticipate that when we actually get to the phase of going in and getting bids for the final design and construction, which need to be hard bids, that the recommendations to your board will to be absolutely include certain projects. Now, whether it's 1 through 8 or 2 and 9, whatever the number is to be determined. But then the other projects, I would anticipate that we're going to bid as optional items, because if bids come in good, then we can get the base ones that we know we need to get done in the construction project, and maybe some of those optional items. So to me, the question is not whether or not the district is going to move forward with construction under PG&E turnkey. It's how much of that construction are we going to be able to afford? And certainly the basic plant upgrades, Mr. Alchin can speak to in greater detail if your board desires at this time, although I think it's really a discussion for when the contract is in front of your board. So good point by Mr. Schwartz, but it's just not, time's not ripe for that question yet.
Yeah, and to provide a little bit of clarity on, I have seen the pro forma contract that PG&E normally uses, and what they do is typical of that industry, because I used to be in the industry. If at the end of their study that they go through and they present all the numbers to us, if we decide to do nothing, okay, with them, we have to pay them back within, I think it's 2 months, okay, the remainder of the money. If we decide to go through with some of the projects, we can try to roll in all of that money or some of that money into those projects, okay? And I think that clarity needs to be done in the contract prior to us obviously signing it, and we'll do that, okay? I personally will make sure that we do that. But this is very typical of how it's done, and the numbers that they come back with after we give them the go-ahead, it usually takes them, they say 6 months, but it never takes 6 months. It takes 8 months or 9 months to get it back in front of us with the numbers. Those numbers are numbers that they are saying they will live with, okay? We don't have to rebid those or anything at that point. That's on them. Okay, they have to get it done for that amount of money if we sign up for the deal. So we will then have that option of picking whatever we want to pick and then moving forward with whatever projects we decide to do. I will say that there is one project in there that is essential for us to go through, and that's them fixing the 3-wire to 4-wire and getting that transformer done. And while they're doing that, it would behoove us to get several of the other projects done. And so I would guess that at the end of the day, we're going to do some project with them of some magnitude in order to get those projects done and get that 3-wire to 4-wire done. That's essential that we get that done. So just adding some more clarity to what you had to say.
And then again, working backwards, appreciate the comments from Ms. Mayer. And certainly she was integral in a number of the ad hoc discussions, and appreciate both her efforts and the others on the Finance Committee. And then with respect to Ms. Bettenhausen comments, really kind of they fall into 2 different categories. One is, you know, with respect to the details on medical and PERS costs, and I kind of encourage that rather than drilling into those details right now, that we work on an analysis as President Pearson indicated, and bring that back to when you're considering the final budget. But my general statement is, it's well known throughout really California and throughout the nation that the challenges associated with these defined benefit plans have been hitting budgets. What has CCSD done? And what else has been done? And I think it's a little bit lost on people that PEPRA, the Public Employees Pension Retirement Act, Reform Act, was adopted around 2014. And whereas prior to that, local agencies had lots of different pension formulas, the California voters basically said, we're going to be modifying, we're going to do pension reform throughout all of California. Those reforms are already having the effect of helping to control pension costs, but there's a lot of vested and accrued liabilities that we're still seeing going up. So even prior to the California state, the PEPRA Act going in effect, CCSD adopted what's called Tier 2 and ratcheted down pension benefits before PEPRA went into effect. So we really have three different categories of pension employees right now. So I always want to make sure that although we are still seeing increases because of historical vested benefits and everything, pension reform has been adopted on a statewide basis. CCSD itself adopted pension modifications even before the statewide law. And then on the medical cost, CCSD previously had a benefit where it was essentially 85% of medical costs for all retirees. And that, again, certain individuals who are vested in that, but that is a benefit that does not exist anymore for new employees, and therefore those types of benefits also have been curbed and reduced long-term costs. And for some agencies, the post-employment health care costs is a bigger liability issue than the pension costs. And part of it is because the retirement medical costs never got pre-funded. Like, pensions were getting pre-funded. The argument is they didn't get pre-funded enough, or the costs have just gone up too high. But those retirement or post-employment, they call them OPEB, other post-employee benefits, which had no pre-funding associated with them, hit a lot of agencies really hard. But CCSD has taken action in prior years to really try to bring both of those costs under control. So what we see still, though, is rising costs associated with previously vested or previously accrued benefits. With respect to this issue, Ms. Bettenhouse used the word money disappeared into the water fund. And I want to politely comment on that, because we've gone through a lot of excruciating efforts to make sure that nothing is disappearing anywhere. We can trace every single dollar, and we know what's happening. But she does separately speak to an issue that is, very much valid, and this is the point that I brought up earlier regarding the Finance Committee and Director Steidel, and working with the Finance Committee of really making sure to scour all the details associated with the Prop 218 assumptions, because there is money within the water fund itself, money that is moving around from one of the funds to help support the costs of the other funds. And I think she appropriately characterized it as money from the water fund is helping with the SWF costs. Now, some of that was incorporated into the Prop 218 analysis. So, for example, the administrative cost allocations were all moved to the water fund under Prop 218. So our budget schedules have attempted to maintain consistency with the Prop 218. The bigger issue associated with the water enterprise activities, because it's still just one set of pipes that deliver water to each and every parcel. We don't have a pipe that provides the well water to the parcels separate from a pipe that provides water from the EWS SWF. It's still one system, and What the district, I think, really did in establishing rate structures for SWF as opposed to rate structures for the basic water operations is attempt to improve the accountability associated with the money that's being collected from the community. There wasn't an intent to say, hey, this money that we're collecting can only be spent for these specific things. But it does beg the question as to whether or not the district, when we come back with interfund loans, do we really need to establish interfund loans between the water fund and the SWF fund? Generally speaking, I'm saying that that's not a requirement, and I'll work with legal counsel to, review everything that's happened. And in the event that a conclusion came back that we really have to have interfund loans between water and SWF operations or SWF capital, then we'll provide those recommendations to your board at that time. Again, there's a lot of details associated with budgeting for the water system overall, and that system includes wells on San Simeon, it includes wells on Santa Rosa Creek, it includes this EWS facility, and they're all part of the water system and part of our overall rates and charges. The rates and charges, though, are very complicated from that standpoint. But again, I think the primary point needs to be is that they're complicated because the district was trying to improve the accountability associated with how are we collecting money and what are we spending it on. And with that, I'm sure Pam would be ready to answer any details.
All right. Questions on the budget? Anyone? Nobody? Okay. I do have one question.
President Pearson?
Oh, yes.
I'd love to interrupt.
Yes.
You'll need a motion to continue past 5.
Oh, it is 5 o'clock. Jeez. All right. I will entertain a motion to go to 5:30 because we'll need that much time.
Yeah, I'll second that.
All right. And we need a roll call vote.
President Pearson?
Aye.
Director Howell?
Aye.
Director Farmer?
It's not a big deal. It's Vice President Farmer. Aye.
So sorry.
It's no problem.
Director Stidel?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Again, the one question I have is it appears that Melissa Bland is in the SWF as far as personnel costs. Is that accurate?
So the district engineer position and also the management analyst are split 33, 33, 34 between water, SWF, and wastewater.
Okay,
and that's been an ongoing allocation. It's not new to this fiscal year.
Okay, so we have allocated money then for a chief engineer.
The district engineer is fully budgeted, yes.
Okay, all right, good. Then I'm clear on allocations then too. Yes.
Yeah, I have one comment. I don't know if it's a question or just a comment. The issue of the administrative costs allocation for the EWS SWF being 100% funded by the water fund itself, I can understand why that's being done because the assumptions of the 218 proposal, I mean the Bartle Wells study, if I understand correctly, that study did put so in order for us to compare and say this is how we're spending your Prop 218 money, we have to follow through with that assumption, otherwise we can't see how that money is actually being spent. But on the other hand, there is another concern which maybe we should think about addressing, which is the feelings that many in the community have that the EWS SWF is sucking money away from the water fund. So at some point we do need to be able to at least answer the question, perhaps not in the context of the budget, but in some accounting procedure where you can say, yes, this is how much the SWF is actually costing. right? And I think this is what perhaps Mrs. Bettenhausen is referring to, is when we're not trying to hide the administrative costs, but because we're trying to show that we're being straightforward with the Prop 218 increase. But at the same time, I think we do have to address that question or be able to reassure people that if the new facility is sucking money out of the water fund, we need to be able to say, oh, yes, it is, and that's what it's costing. But so we want to be sure we're not trying to hide it. But I do think we do need to answer the question. If someone comes to us and says, well, how much did that facility cost us this year, period? How much are we actually... because there are those who really would just as soon push it into the ocean. And so I think we need to be able to answer that question for them. As this is what it is costing. It's an expensive insurance policy, but this is what it costs. So I think in the future we probably have to be prepared to answer that question.
And that's a comment that is well noted. On page 97 of the I guess that's the agenda, page 49 of the actual budget documents, we do have those numbers incorporated. So that's why I was politely saying they haven't disappeared. So, for example, for next year, proposed budget for next year, the water fund is operating at a surplus of about $195,000. SWF operations at about $10,000. SWF capital at a negative $138,000. So overall water, the operating surplus is $67,000, but we have established this model so that we can trace all of those numbers. On a related note, the question was posed, I think during the Finance Committee of, well, why is all those administrative cost allocations shown in water, and why didn't the Prop 218 show administrative cost allocations to SWF? And there's really two theories of thought there. One is that if you proportion out all of the administrative costs, then you would allocate some to SWF and you would show that its actual costs are higher. The other theory of thought, and both of them are valid, is that what SWF does is it simply shows the additional costs that are incurred by the district for the SWF, that those administrative costs would have substantially existed anyhow, right? And so the way that they did the Prop 218 was to show the additional cost of having the SWF facility. So kind of two different theories there on how costs can be allocated. Both have validity to them. But again, we're sticking with how the Prop 218 assumptions were developed.
Thanks. I just wanted to kind of make that explicit, that we weren't hiding anything, and that we were really trying to say, yes, we are spending your money responsibly. That's what we're trying to demonstrate.
Okay. Vice President Farmer.
When I was first elected to the board, expenditures were outpacing revenue by $2 million, and that had been an ongoing way of dealing with the finances of the district for a few years. Fortunately, things have changed for the better in that regard, and the district is addressing the finances that are provided by the ratepayers as efficiently as possible, much more so than in the past. But I do want to make one particular comment, because we're talking about monies from the water fund, the SWF, or emergency water facility, beg your pardon. It's just important to remind ourselves that you get water every day. The facility isn't operating, yet we still continue to spend money on that. And I think it would be a good idea in the future to see how it is that we can adjust the amount of money that we spend on the emergency water facility so we can spend more time addressing the needs of water, especially infrastructure. That's my humble opinion. And I think not only do we need to be as on top of it as possible in explaining to the ratepayers how their monies are being spent, especially with the rate increase, but to see how we can reappropriate those funds so more money can be spent on infrastructure improvements for water. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. I would just like to say that the improvement in the budgeting process from last year is not just remarkable, it is unbelievably outstanding. We have a narrative that tells us what we're spending money on, why we're spending money on those areas, and where we're allocating funds, et cetera, et cetera. We have a finance committee that has looked at the numbers and has judged what we're spending money on and has basically approved that and moved it on to the full board. And when I compare what we did last year and the issues that we had in the finance committee, and Ted's out there grinning, trying to get answers and not coming up with many, and the process this year, it is, as I said, really remarkable, and I commend the staff for doing a great job on presenting this budget. And I'll now entertain a resolution on approving the salary schedule amendment that was made part of the package. We have to do that first.
So, President Pearson, I think that perhaps the appropriate motion would be to adopt Resolution 24-2019, approving the CCSD preliminary budget for FY 2019-2020 with the modified salary schedule.
Okay.
I'll make that motion. And if you don't mind my taking your words, I would be happy to do that.
Great.
All right, I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Stidel?
Yes.
Director Howell?
Aye.
Mr. Vice President Farmer?
Aye.
President Pearson?
Aye. All right, carries 4-0, which means we're on to the consent agenda.
Oh, no.
Nope.
So we've got Resolution 25-2019, recommendation to approve Resolution 25-2019, establishing the fiscal year 2019-2020 appropriations limit.
That's right. That's right. Also the appropriations limit. All right, so who wants to make that motion?
I'll make that. I so move.
Okay. Moved by
I'll second.
Director Howell, seconded by Director Seidel. Can we have a roll call vote on that one, please?
Director Howell?
Aye.
Director Stidel?
Aye.
Vice President Farmer?
Aye.
President Pearson?
Aye.
And then, President Pearson, the final item is any feedback on the two positions. Because if the board is supportive of that concept, then staff would prepare some estimates on to bring back to the final budget. The overall impacts would be pretty nominal. And then we would also initiate what we need to do from an HR perspective.
Yeah, I think the board's pretty much in agreement that that's the career path that you described and stuff is appropriate. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no formal action, but
yeah,
that's fine.
Okay, number 5 is the consent agenda, which basically consists of one item. Unless there's a move to discuss why, I'll just entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. No.
I make the motion to approve the consent agenda, consideration approval of employment. Consideration of approval of an employment agreement with Pavel Wogren for utilities manager services.
Okay. And seconded.
I'll second it. Are we going to have discussion?
Sure.
I just want to say once again that out there in the community, people are really concerned about the ongoing expenses that are mounting with regard to staff and people that we're hiring. And, the district is at a real, how could we say it, a real turning point right now. I don't want to say crisis point, financially the crisis might be applicable, but we're at a real turning point right now with regard to the major improvement in staff and hiring the new general manager and the need for someone to assist the general manager in getting up to speed as to how to do the job. And we're very fortunate to have Mr. Ogren, step up to the plate here. And any added expense that Mr. Ogren will incur by adding to the budget will be certainly repaid by the quality of assistance that he gives to our new general manager. And I think everybody kind of understands that. I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, we can have a roll call vote, please.
Director Stidel?
Aye.
Vice President Farmer?
Aye.
Director Howell?
Aye.
President Pearson?
Aye. Number 6 is future agenda items. We have 4 things on there, all of which are key and need to be done. Anybody have anything else that they want to add as another item on that list? I, of course, will entertain if any of you have anything in the next week or so before we have our agenda meeting, which is Tuesday of next week, I guess. Okay, if you think of something in the meantime, just email me or Vice President Farmer, and we'll bring it up at the meeting. One of us, not both of us.
President Pearson?
Yes.
I think we may want to get, excuse me, on the agenda something regarding the garbage rate increase. I think the audit's going to be done in the next 2 weeks or so, and I know they're hoping to get on quickly. It would be something to the effect of presentation and discussion regarding garbage rate increase, and then you'd set the 218 hearing after that, assuming you were in sync with it. But we need to get it on the calendar.
Okay, so it needs to be a presentation by
It'll be
them.
Bill Statler. He's the auditor
Okay.
that's doing the audit.
Okay.
Then you'll have a discussion regarding it.
All right, that's fine. We'll get that on there.
I think there'd be an expectation, too, that the bylaws would be coming back for approval.
Okay. Anything else? All right, moving on. We will now adjourn to closed session.
You may want to take public comment just in case there is any.
Right, after we adjourn, though, right? And then we reopen?
No.
Oh. Okay. Is there any public comment at this point? All right, then we can move on.
It's agenda item 7. Thank you.
Agenda item 7. Adjourn to closed session.
Thanks to all you folks that sat in the hard chairs out there, by the way.